Good evening, everyone. I'm going to call the meeting to order now. I'd like everyone to stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Painter, will you call the roll, please?
Chair Friend. Vice Chair Keeney.
Present.
Member Juba.
Present.
Member List. Member Raines.
Okay. And I'd like to welcome Barbara Raines to the Planning Commission. Wish you the best of luck, and I think you're an excellent candidate. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I will try to be.
I'd entertain a motion to adopt the tonight's agenda and also the meeting minutes from our November 6th meeting.
I will read off the agenda in a minute.
I have a motion and a second.
Second.
Okay, so we've adopted the agenda and approved, let's see, this is what I needed to bifurcate. I'm sorry. Mr. Painter warned me about this. So let's adopt the agenda. I also would like to make a motion to adopt the meeting minutes from our November 6th meeting. And Ms. Raines, you'll have to abstain on that since you weren't here.
Okay.
All right. And let's see, this is...
I understand the motion is to pull the adoption or the approval of the minutes of the last meeting from the consent calendar.
Let's separate those.
Okay.
So we have adopted our agenda. Let's approve the minutes. Do you have any changes or?
No, move to adopt the minutes of our last meeting, November 6th.
Okay, I'll second your motion. Let's have a voice vote on that.
Aye.
Aye. So our agenda is adopted and our meeting minutes from our last meeting have been approved.
For the record, just for our record keeping, the motion to approve the agenda, was that raised by Member Raines, or are you changing that motion to approve the agenda?
Would you like to change your motion, Mr. Zuzuba?
I believe the motion was to pull the adoption of the agenda from the consent calendar, and then we proceed upon that in a separate motion. Is that correct?
Correct. So I guess what I'm asking is, who made the motion? Have we approved the agenda tonight?
Yes, we have.
Okay.
Ms. Raines proposed that we adopt the agenda for
Great.
your record keeping. I think now I understand your
Okay.
question.
And the second was Member Juba seconded that motion.
Yes.
That's
Thank you.
My apologies. I thought I'd get better at this, but still has some improvement. At this time, I would, we need to cover items of interest to the public, but not on the agenda. Mr. Painter, has there been any written communication you want to bring forward at this time?
No, there have none.
Thank you. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak to something that's not on the agenda? Okay. Thank you very much. We'll move on to item number 4, public hearings. Item 4.1 is regards 1200 Broadway, site plan review 99-08-R McDonald's. This is a major change to the current landscaping at the McDonald's on 1200 Broadway. And Mr. Painter, I'd
Yes, I'll
turn this over to you to give the staff report.
I'll be presenting this tonight, yes. The McDonald's business is located at 1200 Broadway, and they are requesting tonight the Planning Commission to approve a major change to upgrade their approved landscaping for the site. The site is part of the Hangtown Village Square Shopping Center, which is a component of the Broadway Commercial Corridor. The site and immediate surroundings are zoned highway commercial. The existing McDonald's fast food restaurant was constructed back in 1978 under a site plan review. In the mid-1980s, a conditional use permit was granted for a restaurant expansion as well as a drive-through component. In 1999, the restaurant was remodeled and expanded also under a site plan review that included site landscaping. The existing landscaping on the site includes mature redwood and Chinese pistache trees, several shrub species, and a few lawn areas. Proposed landscape materials include the introduction of water-efficient trees, sedges, and grasses, the planting of lichens laurel to create a hedge along the drive-through area of the site. The removal of 2 lawn areas also is proposed. These are located south of the restaurant, and replanting with grasses, sedges, and again the laurel planting, which will help to enhance the building entries and transition from the parking area. Also included in this request is the upgrading of the automatic irrigation system. There does appear to be, in staff's perspective, 3 areas within the landscaping where additional trees could be considered and should be considered by the Commission. These areas are shown as annotations as part of Exhibit B of your staff report. These include the planter islands located in the planter island located in the northwest corner of the site, the landscape planter along the west property boundary with the 76 station, and the parking lot planter strips at the southern portion of the landscape plan is shown in your exhibit with your staff report. Staff encourages the Commission to consider conditioning the request to require the planting of drought-tolerant and native trees in these plant and tree opportunity areas, and to specify the appropriate species and quantify of the number of plantings as conditioned or to be conditioned. Staff recommends the Commission by motion make findings A and B provided in Attachment C of staff's report, that the request is exempt from environmental review, and that as conditioned, the landscape plan is consistent with the general plan and the site plan review criteria. Then the Commission should conditionally approve the request subject to conditions 1 through 4. I will note for the Commission's benefit that Condition 1A was developed as a placeholder should the Commission wish to accommodate landscape plan modifications. So that is an area where the modification to the landscape plan could be incorporated. That concludes my staff report. The applicant's agent, Hala Ibrahim, is in the audience this evening, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Do any of the commissioners have questions for Mr. Painter? I just want to clarify that the existing landscaping dates back approximately to 1999. Is that
As far as
more or less?
staff can
as far as
Yeah.
so there's been
Yeah.
some changes? Okay, thank you very much. Also, I would like to welcome Commissioner Friend here. We got started without you.
I apologize for being late. Apparently, we had a power failure yesterday morning, I think, in town,
Yes.
and the clocks in the house, which are analog, were not updated. And as I
dear.
dawdled,
Thinking you
I
had a
I
couple-
could have been here on time, so my profound apologies, but I'm sure that you have this well in hand.
Oh, don't be so sure of that. And Mr. Painter, we'll just note that Commissioner Friend is present.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Just for a point of order, I believe your name card is in the back table, if you wanted to.
Certainly.
Okay, and back to the item at hand. There is a representative for the project proponent in the audience who'd like to speak about the project. Welcome.
Hi, this is Hala Ibrahim. We're the architects. I'm with PMDG Architects. We are helping McDonald's on pursuing the remodel and the upgrade of the landscape for this project. As part of the
I'm having a little trouble hearing you. Could you bring the microphone a little closer?
Sure. Yeah. So we are the architects representing McDonald's, and what McDonald's and the property owner would like to do there is to enhance the landscape at the property to bring it up to the current standards, use efficient planting with and water that won't use much water, and so that's pretty much so. The request came from the property owner, and McDonald's supported it. So that's why we're pursuing the request and willing for the commissioner to support us and approve it. So if you have any question, this is part of a remodel that McDonald's will be doing to the inside of the building as part of the whole upgrade and enhancing the project from the inside of the building and outside and the site plan. So
Okay, thank you very much.
sure.
Does anyone have any questions about the project? Okay. I did have one question for you. I was a little disoriented by the plan that we were given, and it relates to staff's recommendation to plant a few more trees. So if we could just take a moment to take a look at that. On your, let's see, is that behind us? I was a little confused. The trees here and here, are those
Yeah.
existing trees?
These are the existing trees.
Okay.
Yes.
They weren't, it wasn't clear to me from the legend on the map that that's what you intended
Yes,
for
if,
that. I thought
if
that's
you,
what you
yeah,
meant.
if you look at the, where it says existing planting legend, at the lower middle, no, on the legend, so it's lower on the sheet, exactly. So there it says existing tree to remain. So yeah, these are the existing tree to remain. And then the planting schedule is where the new planting.
They're much more clearly described on the planting. I just was confused as to whether that was one that you were. I think what threw me off is I went and looked at the site and there's a stump, and I was going, okay, well, how many trees are we counting, and what were you going? Are you going to replace the tree that failed, or
So that in that planter, that's a stump, not tree, because supposedly these drawings, created based on what's existing on site, but we can check that. But if there is a tree removed, we can bring it back, I believe.
Well, I think it actually then dovetails well with staff's propose, and you're familiar with what staff is proposing to have you add some additional trees. Is that does that present any kind of problem as far as the rest of your project goes?
Yeah, to tell you the truth, I went to the website and I got the agenda, and there's another piece of paper, but I didn't get the staff report. So,
Well, we have.
help me just even if you just show me here.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, I don't know.
Just a question while you're looking for that, Andrew. The staff report is not typically mailed or distributed to an applicant?
When we have email from an applicant and their agent, that's typically how we send the document.
Okay.
So it's the same, it includes all of the information that we would have uploaded onto our webpage.
Yeah.
So the exhibits that are in your staff report were, to the best of my knowledge, were emailed to the applicant. But I apologize if that was
Okay.
not done.
I mean, I would just presume that an applicant would have the exact same packet and information that I, as a commissioner, have. So, okay, thank you.
So as you're reviewing that, if I understand staff's recommendation, they have proposed 5 additional trees to be planted in the landscaping, and my only I think that that's a good idea, except for one that I think might conflict with some signage that you have existing, which is this one. There's a bulb out here, and you do have a sign there directing traffic.
Correct.
This goes across the creek. This is the only one I thought might pose a problem. there seems to be plenty of room in the landscape to add trees here, another one here. That would kind of actually replace the tree that failed.
Yes.
And then here closer to Broadway on that side.
So mainly the 5 trees goes on the edge of the gas station? Is that where the addition for the trees? So, yeah, is it that's where we're adding the new trees, or maybe here, maybe? Yeah, I can see it here. Yeah, isn't this one? Yeah, so 1, 2, 3, 4. The stump, okay. Yeah, okay, so it's in another edition. Okay. Yeah, I think, I visited that site, and in the back, there's a lot of trees where there's retail. Even when I parked the car, it's well shaded also. So, I don't see problem with adding the trees, except for the one I agree with you where the directional sign is.
Do any of the other commissioners have questions?
These additional trees that staff is recommending, 3 of them towards the back that are adjacent to the residential property, I think depending on species, there may be an issue there with occluding the view of somebody who is trying to get in or out of those parking spaces. You have a driveway coming in, and if somebody is trying to, back out of that parking spot, maybe they don't see the traffic coming.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the residential area is on the other side of some additional parking that's not
Exactly.
shown on this.
Yes.
So if I could just take a second to orient you, these are 2 crossings over to additional parking, and then the residential area is actually well away from this, that row of trees.
I'm referring to these parking spaces here. One second. Here in this corner, near this driveway coming in, there's a parking spot right there. Depending on the species of tree, you may
That's
not
not
be able to
a
see.
private driveway? That's a driveway that connects,
I know, but there's traffic coming through it, so I'm
Okay.
worried if you're in that parking spot and you're trying to back out, the tree might block your view of traffic coming in.
okay, I agree with you also, I just don't think, for another reason, there's existing signage, and I don't think that there's enough room for a healthy tree, and so I think we have, a couple of points, good points there to not include, so reduce the number of trees to 4 rather than 5, as proposed by staff. Okay. Any other questions for the applicant? Okay. Thank you very much. At this point, I'd entertain a motion to move forward.
Point of
with this.
order, Madam Chair. We might want to ask if there are any comments from other members of the audience before we close the public hearing.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I have some
I'd like to
value.
open up at this time if there are any comments from the public on this proposed project in the McDonald's. Seeing none, now I would like to move forward with entertaining a motion to approve this.
The only comment I might offer to my fellow commissioners is staff left it to us to determine tree placement. And do we want to approach it that way and dictate that, or do we, as has been typical, I think, over the last year or 2 or more, to allow the applicant to propose to staff, and staff have the discretion with that, which I would be comfortable. I'm probably more comfortable with that than us dictating. I would go either way. I mean, I think overall this is an enhancement, and I wouldn't want to get too nitpicky with that. But typically, I think we've been approaching it that way. So I'm comfortable doing that if that's the prerogative of the commission. Having the applicant bring some suggestions to staff, work with staff, and staff administratively just taking care of it. If you have strong feelings that you think the commission should specify a species and location, I could do that too. But you know.
Comments? Okay. Well, I think that's a good point. And also, I think staff has heard concerns from the commissioners about that one location in particular that perhaps that would not be the best place to plant an additional tree. Having said that, I would like to hear a motion to take action on this proposal.
I'll give it a go. Sure.
Okay.
So I move that we make the findings A and B as outlined in attachment C of staff's report and approve SPR 9908-R, subject to the conditions that the landscaping plan follow the plan submitted by the applicant with the addition of 4 trees, placement and species to be approved by staff at discretion with the applicant. So,
Can I, do I have a second for that motion?
I'll second the motion for the point of
Okay, we
discussion.
have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the motion before us?
And adopting the staff report as part of the public record is presumed part of the motion.
yes.
Okay, as amended. Mr. Painter, I think we're ready for a roll call vote.
Member Juba.
Yes.
Chair Friend.
Aye.
Member Raines.
Aye.
Vice Chair Keeney.
Aye. Thank you. So that passes, and yeah, I look forward to seeing the improvements down there at the McDonald's. I think it's going to be a nice change for our community. It's a very prominent spot, and thank you very much. Now, we will move on to second item on our agenda, 4.2, the zoning change, 18-01, Cannabis Business Overlay Zone. This was continued from our last meeting in November. At this point, I'll turn it over to Mr. Rivas for the staff report.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission. Let me start by saying that you're going to be considering 2 different things. First, it's the Cannabis Business Overlay Zone text, which is in addition to the zoning code, and then the Cannabis Business Overlay Zone map changes, which you have the exhibits in your staff report. Staff's provided you with colored maps that I will go over later in the presentation. Then you have blow-ups of the version of those maps behind you. So what staff is requesting is that we're requesting that the Planning Commission hold a public hearing and consider staff's zoning ordinance amendments that's relating to the Cannabis Business Overlay Zone and the zoning map amendments. And then 2, that the Planning Commission forward a recommendation that the City Council approve an ordinance amending the Placerville City Code, and that's adding section 10528, which is called the Cannabis Business Overlay Zone, to chapter 5, which is the general regulations, which would allow and regulate the establishment of commercial cannabis business activities within the city of Placerville, and also then amend the Placerville zoning map, adding the Cannabis Business Overlay Zone to select parcels that are shown in Exhibit A, which we call the west map, meaning the west end of Placerville, and then Exhibit B, which is the east end. They're included as Attachment 1. On October 9th of this year, the City Council adopted Ordinance 1693, and what that ordinance did was repeal Title 5, which was the previous business regulations of Chapter 25, and Title 10 of the zoning ordinance, And those previous ordinances actually prohibited cannabis activities or businesses in the city of Placerville. And then now we're looking at adding Title 10, the zoning ordinance, Chapter 10, Sections 1 through 5 of the Placerville Municipal Code, and adding Title 5, Business Regulations, Chapter 28. The referenced repealed city codes that prohibited the cultivation, distribution, and dispensing of medical marijuana in the city, and prohibited medical marijuana dispensaries from located within the city of Placerville. The new Title V, Chapter 28, would allow commercial cannabis business activities, including the cultivation, manufacture, processing, laboratory testing, transportation, dispensing, distribution, or sale of cannabis or cannabis products for those with a valid commercial cannabis business permit and business license that would be issued by the city of Placerville and holding a valid state of California seller's permit. Section 528250, which is the location and design of cannabis businesses, requires that a permitted cannabis business be located in specified commercial zones and that minimum distances be maintained from specified sensitive uses as defined in California Business and Professions Code and the California Health and Safety Code. The City Council later then convened a committee. It was called the Cannabis Regulating Committee, and that committee prepared the draft Cannabis Business Overlay Zone map, meeting the zoning and required location distance from the sensitive uses criteria for consideration by the Commission for recommendation back to the full City Council. And lastly, on November 13th of this year, the City Council adopted a resolution which limited the number of cannabis retailers that would be permitted within the city to no more than 3, and the number of testing laboratories to be no more than 3. The staff has prepared a draft cannabis business overlay zone district, adding 10-5-25 CBO, which we call the CBO zone, the Cannabis Business Overlay Zone, to Chapter 5 of Zoning Regulations of the Zoning Ordinance, which is in your packet, also to be considered by the Planning Commission for recommendation to the City Council. If you look at that overlay zone, it's rather simple, and that is because the business regulations will fully regulate the operation of the cannabis businesses as defined in the code, and it's a very rigorous application process, and I'll briefly go over that with you in a moment. With respect to environmental review to both the ordinance and the map, this staff has considered that this ordinance and zoning map amendment is not a project subject to the California Environmental Quality Act pursuant to 15061B3, because the project is covered by the general rule that CEQA applies only to projects that may cause a significant effect on the physical environment, and that the permitting of commercial cannabis businesses in the selected commercial zones are similar in nature to those commercial activities currently allowed within those zones by right. And the only commercial zones that were being affected tonight would be the commercial zone and the highway commercial zone, which includes retail sales and service, eating and drinking establishments, restaurants, grocery stores, pharmacies, compounding pharmacies, bakeries, microbreweries, etc. So from staff's analysis, we don't see anything beyond the scope of a retail cannabis business that would set it aside where we would look at a conditional use permit or something where there would be physical impacts of significance rendering a negative declaration or say environmental impact report. I do want to add that the business regulations do specify heavy commercial and industrial, but after the draft cannabis overlay map was prepared by the Cannabis Committee, none of those zones were identified as being appropriate for application of the zone, so we don't need to consider those tonight. There was a consideration and still being considered, and that is if we would see in the future any standalone manufacturing of cannabis products, edibles, those kinds of things. We're still evaluating the nature of the more industrial type uses that may be considered. Maybe we're looking at flammable materials, different types of solvents, and those kinds of things. So when that time comes, we may be back before you looking at adding a conditional use permit requirement for a cannabis activity that would be manufacturing standalone. But for the time being, we do not have that, so that's not currently before you. So to talk a little bit about the cannabis overlay map, again, the City Council convened a cannabis overlay committee, and they looked at, for the most part, their criteria were to look at applying the overlay zone to parcels that were zoned either commercial or highway commercial along the Placerville, Green Valley Road corridor, portions of Main Street and Broadway. No application of the overlay was applied to any commercial or highway commercial lands found to be located east of Schnell School Road. So that is basically a line drawn in the sand, if you will. Upon further review, staff is making some additional recommendations to the map that is in your packet. You can see the two large blow-ups with the gray shading directly behind Commissioner Zuba. And staff has placed red dots on certain parcels that staff feels did not meet the criteria that the committee had meant, but with the expediency necessary with regards to certain state requirements, we were moving quite quickly to get these maps to you. But one of the criteria that the Cannabis Overlay Committee had was that that any of the parcels to have a cannabis activity have frontage so that the building is clearly visible from the main frontage road. And so if you look at that map, staff identified certain parcels that were behind the parcel and do not have direct frontage or do not have direct access to, say, Placerville Drive or on the Perot's Road area. And so staff is making a recommendation that maybe you would forward a recommendation to the council to consider deletion of those. We also deleted some additional parcels. We received a telephone call from the state of California with regards to the DMV, which was included in the overlay. They wanted that overlay removed. The DMV felt that maybe the compatibility of cannabis dispensary and getting a driver's license maybe wasn't a good idea, at least perceptually from the public. So we're recommending that the two parcels that compromise the DMV in their parking lot be removed. We also removed the Caltrans yard located on Blair's Lane and directly across the street. We're also recommending deletion of the PG&E substation would also be deleted. And we're also recommending that the parcel that was more recently acquired by the city of Placerville for the expansion of the police department also be eliminated. That's that parcel that essentially serves as a parking lot directly west of the existing police station. We're also recommending removal of that parcel. I'm trying to think if I've left anything off. So I want to just talk briefly about the map that's up there it would be in my far left. The one with the yellow on it, that was one of the first maps that we produced, and the city prepared a map that shows a 250 setback from sensitive uses, and these sensitive uses are defined by the state. Those would include daycare centers, schools, public parks, Boys and Girls Club, for example. Those kinds of uses were identified, churches. And we then made a yellow, we would yellow any of the lots that were captured by that 250 overlay so that they would not be afforded the application of the cannabis overlay zone. So then from there, we developed the two maps. The one you see with the green shaded ones, we provided those so you can get a better sense of the parcels that are affected with that green shading, but you could see that we have the the aerial so you can get a better perspective of where it's located. But that's that one there. Then the one on the left would be the east map, and then the one that encompasses most of Placerville Drive and Green Valley Road, that would be the west map. And then you see two maps to the far right, one with green shading around what looks like a tanned area, and then one with a dark brown with sort of a mustard colored. There was a desire on the committee to include those parcels on the north side of Main Street that fell within the 250 setback from Sierra School. So we did two different iterations. We did one where we show the entire school facilities. That's the one on the bottom. And so the yellow, of course, eliminates all those parcels located both on the north side and the south side of Main Street. It was the opinion of the committee that due to topographic constraints, and it may be within the 250 as the crow flies, but actually driven by car or walking distance, you're much greater than 250 feet. So we produced another map that's up on top, that's still the 250-foot radius, but we shrunk the actual school building and playground area so that we were able to show that clearly we could be comfortable adding the overlay to the north side of Main Street. But I do want to add that anybody coming in that wanted to make an application for establishing a cannabis business on one of those parcels, because it still falls within the 250-foot radius, it would be subject to a variance procedure, and that variance procedure would go through that's basically specified in the Title V, the business section of the regulation. So we would notify property owners, they would go through a variance process, we would go to the hearing officer, which would be the city manager, subject to appeal to the city council. So that variance procedure would not come back to you. Neither would any other considerations of a cannabis business establishment, because it would go through the very rigorous, what we would call a licensing process. There was a lot of debate about that licensing process versus a conditional use permit process, and consulting with our city attorney, it was felt that you could run into some issues regarding a conditional use permit that runs with the land. And so we didn't want to have a situation where a person holding the appropriate license to run a cannabis business, and then they run afoul of the ordinance. It's much easier to take away a license, revoke a license, versus then there would still be a conditional use permit on the property. We didn't want then the owner saying, well, we're just going to get somebody else to go in there. It gives the city much greater discretion than on eliminating use if it's found to be in a bad location, incompatibility, not being run appropriately, and so on. One thing I do want to add to you, I didn't want to forget. In your packet, you did receive public comment, and they were some of the comments were attached. We received a letter from the Putoff Family Partnership. We received a letter from Judy Putoff and from the PUBA Properties, and from John Monroe and Julia Parrish, and they attached an article from the Register Guard. So those comments were available in your packet, and hopefully you've been able to read those. Since the preparation of the staff report, staff has received additional comments, and we made copies of those for you, and they're before you to peruse. One we received is a one-page comment from Mr. Ernest Harrison, and then we also received a letter directed to the Planning Commission, and it was a petition that we received December the 3rd, yesterday. And it looks like most of the signatories to this petition are from the Panning Way and Sleepy Hollow area, but there were others from other areas of the city, and then some outside of the city. So you have those, and I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I have neglected to talk about up to this point. But very, very quickly, I just want to talk briefly, even though it's not before you. I think it's just good background to have. Staff is currently working with HDL. HDL is a consulting firm that provides various economic development consulting services and provides information to the city. In addition, they have a whole cannabis section of their company that consults on preparation of cannabis-related ordinances and procedures. So staff is currently working with them on an application procedure and guidelines for cannabis facilities. It's very, very involved. Phase 1, we would call the application submittal and determination of eligibility, and basically it's scrutinizing the individual person or party that will be coming in that will actually own and operate the business itself, not necessarily the person leasing the property. And once they get through that, and there's a number of different things. For example, the Placerville cannabis facility application with all attachments has to be provided. There's limitations on city's liability. There's the waiver. There's an approved zoning verification letter from Development Services Department. In other words, they've identified the property where they propose to locate, and then the actual applicant, the persons involved, we would do a live scan, a criminal history check application from each owner, and the principal and proof of payment. And then if they pass through that, then they can move on to phase 2, and the phase 2 of the application evaluation, and then there's an initial ranking. So the applications would be evaluated and ranked by HDL companies based on the criteria listed, and we're looking at the proposed location. We'd be looking at their business plan, neighborhood compatibility plan, safety and security plan, an air quality plan, and basically that's tied to odor issues, and labor and employment plan. So there's a scoring, and the applicants that score a minimum of 80% in phase 2 can then move on to phase 3. In phase 3 would be interviews and a second ranking. So those applicants that pass the phase 2 will be interviewed and evaluated by the city's selection committee. And the selection committee would be comprised of city staff and consultants that have the subject matter expertise in the criteria upon which they would be evaluated. So the applicants will be interviewed and evaluated based on a number of criteria. And again, we're looking at location, proof of ownership, the business plan, the neighborhood compatibility plan, the safety and security plan, and the air quality plan. Labor and employment, community benefits, enhanced product safety, environmental benefits, local enterprise, and the qualifications of the owners. So phase 3 scores will be tabulated and combined with phase 2 scores to establish an overall ranking of the applications. So all applications that maintain a score of at least 80% or a percentage determined by resolution will move on to phase 4 of the application process. So phase 4 will be conducted primarily by the city manager, and that would be final approval and issuance of a local license. And only those applicants that have scored above 80% determined by resolution after phase 3 will be eligible to receive a local license under phase 4. So prior to making that final decision, the city reserves the right to request and obtain any additional information from any candidate who submitted an application. The city manager will review the selection committee's evaluation and make a final decision and issue a local license. The city manager may only award as many local licenses as allowed under the section of the code or by resolution by the council, which, as I mentioned earlier, is up to 3 dispensaries and up to 3 labs. Furthermore, the city manager will reserve the right to award a lesser number of local licenses or award no permits at all. And of course, this would be appealable to the city council. So even though this is in its still draft stages, I wanted to go over that with you so that the Planning Commission and the public is aware of the scrutiny that will be involved prior to anybody trying to obtain a license to operate a cannabis activity within the city of Placerville. So I've said a lot, and you probably have a lot of questions. So with that, that'll conclude staff's report, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have at this time.
Thank you very much. And I have to say, looking over the ordinance, it is exhaustive, and I had one question about working with HDL. Is this fairly standard approach for their other clients as far as writing all the specifications into our, as far as the background checks and the 4-phase approach for, security and everything? Is this becoming the standard practice throughout California?
Yes, it is becoming a standard practice. There was a lot of variation in terms of a license and or a land use permit. In our case, a conditional use permit. So, some jurisdictions have opted with just doing the license, where some jurisdictions even wanted additional scrutiny. And so, not only would an applicant be required to obtain a license to operate the business, because it's regulating the operation of dispensing a controlled substance versus the land use permitting under a conditional use permit. And I said earlier, staff considers that at least in terms of how we envision that a dispensary would operate, it's no difference in the characteristics than those types of uses already permitted in a commercial or a highway commercial zone district. And so that's why we're proposing that it would be by right rather than a conditional use permit. And again, with the caveat that if we do see under further analysis regarding types of chemicals or different types of gases that may be flammable or explosive, if we see in the future the manufacture of different kinds of products, maybe that may warrant a conditional use permit, but we haven't reached that point yet. And so, staff feels that with the procedures set forth in obtaining the license, that there wouldn't be a need to duplicate again going through the Planning Commission, subject to appeal to the City Council, a conditional use permit, especially with a legal issue with that particular land use permit running with the land. The city wants to be able to readily pull a license should there be some review of the application where it runs afoul of the code. I do want to also emphasize that upon issuance of a license, it's good for 1 year, subject to renewal, and so it gives the city great discretion on reviewing the business and pulling the license and not renewing it if they're not meeting the terms of that license.
Thank you very much. Other questions from the commissioners?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a couple of questions, but first I'd like to make a comment, actually for the benefit of those folks in attendance. Our charge this evening, as I understand it, is to receive public input, and from that input and from the information that's presented to us by staff, to make recommendations to the City Council in terms of finalization of the ordinance and the text. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes, that is correct. You have the text before you. Staff isn't proposing any additional changes to the zoning text as it now stands. Yes, absolutely. Take in public comment. You may want to consider either adding or deleting some parcels as shown on the drafts map based on public comment. Staff did provide those 2 gray larger maps there, and you can see where we place the red dot. Staff is recommending that those be removed based on the fact that the majority of those parcels that are shown with the red dot don't have road frontage. That's something that the Cannabis Committee wanted. We have 1 parcel that has a green dot, meaning staff wants that added in. That would be the lot that contains the Camino Power Tools and the A1 appliance store. That particular lot, was left out because the GIS system, for whatever reason, had it zoned something else rather than commercial. And that popped out to us, and when we verified it with the official zoning map, we found that it was commercial. We want that added in because it should have been shown as being included. So with that, yes, open the public hearing, consider public comment, considering any modifications you wish to forward on to the City Council.
Thank you. So just following up on that, then I'd like to just encourage the members of the public who are here to appreciate that the members of the commission will more than likely have a number of questions to ask, either of staff, possibly of speakers, and amongst ourselves. And the questions and deliberations, I do not think, should be taken as any one commissioner's position in favor or opposed to the subject matter at hand. I think it's our responsibility to do due diligence in our deliberations on something that's important like this. I think the fact that the city has a relatively complex and thorough licensing approach underscores that this particular issue is perhaps a little bit different. I have a couple of specific questions for staff that hopefully will be helpful for everyone. First of all, I think you've already answered in terms of the commission's role. We are not obligated to accept what has been proposed to us. We can offer a different proposal in terms of either the text or the map. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. The zone, as might be recommended this evening and ultimately approved by City Council, could in the future be expanded or contracted by action. Is that correct?
That is correct. And based on the substantive nature of any future changes of the code, some of those would more than likely come back to the commission for consideration.
Was there any consideration of a lottery process like we do with hard alcohol licenses? I believe the county sets a specific number of hard alcohol licenses that are allowed, and then may have a lottery whenever licenses are available. Was there any consideration for approaching it that way?
I don't believe so. I think from the onset, HDL made the proposal to use a point system, and it's a very involved point system to where it should readily ferret out than the top contenders.
Well, and actually what I was thinking is 3 is a fairly small number, which means the product is limited, and therefore the value is really increased, and that there may have been an opportunity missed along those lines, but I won't go down that any further. In terms of the analysis by the Cannabis Committee, and is there a member of the Cannabis Committee present, or is there a chairperson, or how that process went? Is there somebody here this evening?
The Cannabis Committee comprised 2 members of the City Council and city staff, and I don't see any of the council members in the audience.
Okay. The ultimate analysis, was that a written report by any chance?
For the map?
Because several places and in your presentation you referred to based upon the analysis of the Cannabis Committee XYZ, and I was just wondering if there was a written report, and is that a matter of public record?
No, there is no written report that would be a matter of public record. In fact, there's no, other than notes that maybe staff would have taken when staff went back to actually prepare the maps as being prepared by the committee. And again, it's more of a mapping exercise. The very beginning was the map where we wanted to show those parcels that would have been affected by a 250-foot setback, and that's the one that's behind you with the yellow. And then they narrowed it down to where they didn't want it. Originally, we were looking at some central business district parcels, and then but it was basically by consensus of the committee that they wanted to keep it out of the central Main Street area.
Okay.
But they still wanted it to, we wanted to allow some flexibility, so that's why it was mainly concentrated then on the Placerville Drive area, and then Upper Main Street, and then Broadway up to Schnell School Road.
Okay. Resolution from November 13th, 18th, that wasn't included with our packet, was it?
The resolution, you mean limiting the number?
That limited the number. That wasn't provided.
That's not provided.
Okay, all right. I'm almost finished, I promise. what does the law require of the city in terms of this issue? I mean, it's state law now that cannabis is legal. The city is obligated, I presume, then to allow possession and sale as this ordinance is going. Is that correct?
That's correct. And there was a little bit of, well, I might say, a little bit of haste on the part of the city. This ordinance was put together, and that's probably why we went out and went with a consultant that had a lot of experience in preparing these, because we were under a deadline where if we didn't meet that deadline, we would default to the state regulations.
Right.
And so
Okay.
by the city adopting this ordinance, then it keeps the regulating at the local level. So we can regulate it even at a greater extent than maybe that we would had we defaulted to the
Otherwise,
state
we would have given up
regulations.
local control in that case and defaulted to the state. A technical question then. We keep talking about a license, yet in the text of the ordinance, and I'll just pick one on page 21, 5.28.200, it talks about a permit, and I'm just wondering if wherever permit is seen in the ordinance, that should be license.
Permit and license interchangeable.
Really? Okay.
It's a
My personal
it's a-
preference then would be we call it a license, but that's for deliberation
I will
amongst commissioners.
certainly, I can pass that along.
All right. And then my last question, just any direction staff might offer to us in terms of what factors should this body consider in our, when we review and consider the boundaries? And that's kind of a general question. At any point you want to offer some words of wisdom would be appreciated.
Certainly will.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Question for staff procedurally. If we don't come to a consensus here, I see we have 4 people on the commission, what happens?
We would forward that to the city council, that there was not a consensus with the planning commission. And then they would move forward with
And
considering the drafts.
to amend the zoning code.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. I guess what I'm saying is if you weren't able to bring forth a recommendation to the city council, it doesn't stop the process.
I wanted to follow up on the permit versus a license, and I just want to make sure I'm clear on having the cannabis business. Is that then permitted by right, or is it still a conditional use permit, or is that all kind of gone away because we have this phased-in licensing procedure?
Yeah, the permit, the procedure and the permit that will be issued then will be under the city's business regulations. So it's not under the zoning code. The purpose of the zoning code was to identify and then clearly show those commercial and highway commercial properties where someone could come in and establish the use physically. But the operation would be under a permit or license. And that's a very good point, and I will bring that up with the city attorney on whether we should consider changing that word or not. I don't know if that's an issue or not legally, but we'll look at it.
Essentially, as I would approach it, is the zoning permits or prohibits an activity in a given area, then the permit, or in my preference, license, gives an individual the privilege to engage in that activity. You're licensed to conduct that activity. It's a privilege that you're given, and that's how I would draw the distinction.
It's a very,
Then
very
would-
good distinction.
Would you have a possibility of a conditional use permit? Because we issue those for in different situations, but that would not come into play for the cannabis business?
No.
Okay.
It's not to say that the commission could recommend that the city council consider requiring a conditional use permit for a
On top.
cannabis use.
Okay.
On top of being issued the permit license
Okay.
under the business section of the code. But as staff had mentioned earlier, it was staff's opinion that the actual activity is no different than a pharmacy, compounding, microbrewery, all the different commercial uses that are permitted by right in the commercial and the highway commercial zone. We didn't see this particular activity any more impacting to the physical environment. So the reason why it's so highly regulated is because it's a controlled substance, like alcohol. I mean, you can have a liquor store. Well, there's a lot of licenses with the state. Somebody has to have to sell alcohol, but we don't require a conditional use permit for a liquor store in certain commercial zones. So I would look at it in that text. But I'm glad you brought that up, because I do want to point out that, let's just say, for example, we have an applicant that purchases a piece of property with a dilapidated building on it, or a vacant piece of property, and then they want to raise the building or construct a whole new building. Well, then they're going to go through the site plan review process in accordance with the zoning code. That would come before this body. You would consider that site plan review.
Okay.
So you'd be considering the elevations, the architecture, the site plan, the parking lot, landscaping, all of that. So none of that they're not exempt from that. So if they do, depending upon the nature of the improvements to the exterior of the building or the property, the application may come before you in that context, and that would be under a site plan review process. But it's limited in its scope. Again, it's more to the physical improvements of the property, as opposed to considering the actual running of the cannabis business, which would be then regulated under the licensing or permitting provisions.
Yes, sir.
If the consensus is, I mean, among staff or the city council or the cannabis committee, that this really is no different from, alcohol or a compounding pharmacy in terms of impact to the physical environment, why exclude Main Street, downtown Main Street, from this overlay zone? I don't know what the rationale behind that is.
The council just felt that they didn't want to see cannabis businesses in basically the downtown historic area, which is probably, I would say, captures 90+% of the central business district zoning. And so we just took it out. And so it was only applied then to the commercial and highway commercial along those particular areas. I mean, there was a lot of debate, believe me, amongst committee members. Some people wanted a more free market. I mean, they could have gone all the way over the direction and just not had an overlay zone, and just have said that in any commercial, highway commercial zone in the city, you could apply and then go through this process. But the council wanted to restrict it. They wanted to make sure they had road frontage. They only wanted it on these basic main streets. That's why, for example, you'll see the red dots. We took out some of those parcels that front on Easy Street, because the committee didn't want it on Easy Street or those smaller commercial side streets. They wanted it on Placerville Drive, Main Street, Broadway.
The ordinance in front of us, our copy of it, does specify Central Business District
Yes.
as one of the zones that we're considering this. I mean, is that not Main Street, downtown?
No, that would be parcels. I would just clarify, I mean, it's more of I understand where you're going with that. Because Central Business District could be outside, so it allows the city the opportunity to amend the zoning map, and we can apply it to Central Business District in the future. We can apply it to heavy commercial in the future, and we can apply it to industrial
I see. In the future.
in the future.
Additional questions?
Yes. Okay, as I understand it, there are only going to be 3 cannabis shops in the city of Placerville.
That's correct. Yes, the city council basically by resolution, which the code requires, specifies that the city council will by resolution define the maximum number, and it was three cannabis dispensaries and 3 labs.
Okay.
Not to say that the council could change that in the future, either increase it or decrease it.
All right. Why the terminus at Schnell School Road? Why not extend the overlay further east?
The committee did not want cannabis activities east of Schnell School Road, primarily because of some of the law enforcement issues that take place east of Schnell School Road. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
That was the rationale.
Okay, thank you very, very, very much. And is it true that just because we approve the overlay does not mean that somebody's parcel necessarily would have a shop on it? Or that people would have to worry about it being, you want Main Street, you want a Main Street coverage. Okay, so if there's a parcel further back, I don't think there's that much of concern of somebody having a shop in their backyard.
Well, the concern with staff's recommendation to remove some of those parcels that didn't have the road frontage is that was a very serious criteria of the committee.
Okay.
Is that, you know, the frontage of the building is clearly visible from a street, not behind. A clear example would be along Placerville Drive. You have some of those businesses that are actually not even at grade.
Right.
They're below
Yeah.
the grade of Placerville Drive, like Mike's Cycle, for example. That's below. And there are other parcels and buildings that are kind of hidden. We don't want, we want the building to be clearly visible. So that was the purpose.
That's
for
what I
that.
thought. All right.
And then there was another, I'm trying to remember what the beginning of your question, because I think, trying to think of a response to, what was your, the very beginning of your question? Because I think it was
Well, my question was, there's 3 shops. My question was, why did you exclude east of Schnell School Road? And then clarification that even if the overlay was approved, does not necessarily mean that there's going to be a store on every one of those parcels, or every one of those parcels are going to be considered for a store.
Very good question.
I recognize that you want a major thoroughfare so people can see them.
Right.
I've been through Oregon. Those shops show up.
Right.
Okay, and I understand that. And that's just what I wanted to clarify.
No, very, very, very good question, Commissioner Raines, and I do want to talk a little bit about that, mainly for the benefit of the public. We did get a lot of comments from concerned residents about all of a sudden where they're going to be springing about like mushrooms. Well, first of all, if a property owner's commercially zoned property had in the future will have the cannabis overlay zone on it, they don't have to allow a cannabis activity on their property. It's purely at their discretion if they want to engage in it, or they could lease it out to somebody else that wants to then lease the building or lease the project and have that business. But then it would, that person that wishes to engage the business would go through all the scrutiny of that involved process to obtain the license. But no, it doesn't mean that every single property must have or will have. It would be based on the first of all, it has to have the overlay on it, and then the owner must be willing to enter into a lease, or the person wanting to engage in it owns the property and then would go through the process to be issued a license.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff at this time? Okay, I would like to open this up. Thank you very much, Pierre. This is a very complex issue and potentially contentious, and I think actually our most important job for the Planning Commission tonight is to start hearing public comment on this cannabis overlay, proposed overlay zone change. And so at this point, I'd like to open up the meeting to public comment on the matter before us. I'd like to emphasize again what the Planning Commission's responsibility is to, take in your input and discuss that, possibly modify the proposed overlay, and then send a recommendation up to the City Council. And we have quite a few people here, and I am going to ask speakers to please come up, and if you don't mind, please identify yourself. And I am going to, at this time, limit your comments to 3 minutes so that everyone gets a turn to speak. And if you're with a group and you have maybe a representative who could come up and summarize everyone's comments, that certainly would expedite things. I don't want to cut anyone off from speaking out publicly. But at this point, I'd like to welcome anyone to come up and speak about the proposal.
Thank
Good
you.
evening.
My name is Kelly Chisano. I represent Pure Life Collective. We are a operating state licensed cannabis dispensary in El Dorado County. We're located in Diamond Springs. We've been there since 2011, and we've been working with the county on all of their new stuff and their old stuff. So I want to thank the staff and the city council and the cannabis group, even though they're not here. They put in a lot of hours. It wasn't like they just sat down one evening and quickly went through this. I know they did multiple sessions, meeting for multiple hours. So I want to thank them. A few of them did tour our facility in that part of that project to help them get a greater scope of the whole thing. As far, let's see. Right now, I heard it. I'm going to kind of just go over a couple of questions that I heard out there that hopefully I can help maybe shed a little more light on. I know there's concern with there being, and the mayor's concern was that there being 3 being too large of a number. Her vote was actually a no because she thought that 2 was a better number. And it's really, there's not that many available parcels that are even in this existing map. I think that's from what I heard before they went with that original map and realized it was going to be difficult to find any zoned available parcels, because yes, you have all these green areas, 90% of them have existing businesses in them. So it's not like it's going to be a flooded, all of a sudden every corner is going to be taken over kind of a thing. The state does give control to the most local jurisdiction as far as licensing, so they do pass on. That's why our current ban was able to stop businesses from establishing. So the city can set any parameters above, or if they need to, like, negotiate the 250 feet around the school so that they can get that comfortable zone. So even though we know as a city resident of Placerville, you're not walking from Sierra School down that hill over the back of the old DA's, whatever this, public defender's office, it's straight up. Let's see, and I did hear, in the Main Street, with regards to downtown Main Street, it was that being out of the map was, from what I understood, was a compromise to help keep the people of the community that were very anti-cannabis businesses happy and not, not taking all commercial spaces, because there was the downtown commission was represented, and they specifically spoke up about not wanting to see cannabis activity on that small corridor. And I think because of also technically how tight that corridor is with parking and limited space. And then, I think that I want to recommend that you guys move ahead with the map that we have there. I think that it's well thought out, and I think that with the exceptions of the red, obviously the PG&E doesn't need to be in there, and the other couple lots that are utility. And so also, as I did to the other like city council members, I'd like to open my doors if any of you would like a tour of my facility, where I'm there 5 days a week in the morning, so we can arrange that and you can come and see what these types of businesses. I know you're acting today, but if you're interested, just for knowledge. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may,
Sure.
and this is just strictly a request in terms of how you plan to run this. If a commissioner should have a question of a speaker, are you going to allow that, or you want everyone just to go?
I think we
I
should allow,
defer.
yeah,
All right,
a
thanks.
few
So
questions.
I just have one question then for the gentleman, Mr. Chisano was. So you are in the business professionally and have been since 2011. Is that, I got that
Correct.
correct? So do you have any major concerns with either the text of the ordinance or the map as been presented?
No, that my recommendation is to go with
Okay.
what you have been presented. They've done a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please. Good evening.
Oh, hi, my name's Julie Parrish. And my brother, John Monroe, and I are the owners of the property located at 55 Placerville Drive, which is within the current cannabis business overlay zone. This property, the site of Thompson's Buick GMC dealership, is very important to our family, the Thompsons family, the many people they employ and their families, and the dealership's customers. Therefore, anything that could negatively impact the profitability of the dealership and the well-being of the people involved with it is of great concern to us. Repulsive smells emanated by cannabis processing and use will discourage customers from shopping outdoors for a new car. In addition, an increase in drivers impaired by marijuana will make entering and exiting the dealership even more difficult and dangerous. Studies show cannabis businesses are associated with increased crime in adjacent areas. That is not a good environment for customers and employees and would result in an increased insurance and security costs and lower property value. There is a stigma associated with cannabis business, which is illegal on the federal level. This stigma would discourage customers from shopping at the dealership should a cannabis business open nearby. Another reason this area should not be included in the cannabis zone is because the El Dorado County Fairgrounds is located in the area. A cannabis store is not a family-friendly environment for fairgoers. Children would be in close proximity to marijuana users. Easy access to marijuana in the area would lead to an increase in crime and altercations on the fairgrounds, especially after dark. We think it is a great disservice to allow a cannabis business to come in and disrupt and impair the operations of an established business. It is our most sincere request that areas along Placerville Drive be excluded from the cannabis business overlay zone to avoid foreseeable problems. If this cannot be accommodated, we request at the very least the zone be redrawn to exclude the areas along Placerville Drive south of Ray Lawyer Drive. We appreciate your consideration of our request.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate you sending a letter to the city that was included in our packet. Would someone else like to approach the podium? Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Tyler Champlin. I'm a founding partner of CN Holdings. We're a current operating cannabis vertically integrated company. We have 5 active locations currently operating, and we are pursuing 5 other markets currently in California, and Placerville is being one of them. I first want to speak to a few of the points that the speaker before me touched on as it relates to odor and safety. As part of the merit-based scoring rubric that we're required to go through both from the city and the state, we're required to submit odor mitigation reports to prove up how we're going to alleviate any odor or any nuisance whatsoever that would affect our neighboring tenants. So that's a very tedious process. And also the security, we provide security plans both to the city and to the state. We hire third-party consultants that monitor our properties 24 hours. They're under 24-hour surveillance. Every inch of that property is under surveillance. In some certain circumstances, in some municipalities, we're required to have direct feed to the chief of police. So I promise you, there's no public nuisance. If anything, it's under lock and key. All product is taken into a secure room, and nothing is left out on the sales floor. Yeah, so I think I stand here in support of the ordinance and business overlay zone that's in front of you. I have several years of experience operating both cultivation, manufacturing, and distribution in retail facilities, and I think you guys have done a great job. We've actually worked with HDL in the past, so they know what they're doing. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
A brief question, if I
Certainly.
may raise this. So how is product typically delivered? Is it an armored car or is it a flower-colored Volkswagen bus?
Oh, stereotypes. I love them. So it's a delivery car with a sign saying, come get me. I'm just joking. So typically it's, as product's going to be delivered, it's not in a, it'll be,
Non-discrete?
yeah, so products, the product intake will be done prior to business hours. You do it, and they come in and they don't divvy it up on site. Everything's going to be pre-packaged, and it typically is done at a distribution facility. If you have a micro business license, you can then do it on site, but where you have a retail license as well. But typically, it's all pre-packaged. It'll be a weekly delivery that'll happen, and I'm sure you can speak to and confirm and relate to that. So.
And is that regulated by the state, that whole process?
Correct.
Okay. And then the last similar question, do you support what's being proposed?
Absolutely. I think you guys have done a great job.
Thank you.
I have one question for the speaker. Do you typically do business in all cash or electronic payments
Yeah,
as well?
so unfortunately, the state of the banking industry right now is it's evolving. Something was before the state to allow us to participate in banking, but it's still federally regulated, so that's evolving. Unfortunately, yes, there is. It's a cash business. There are certain credit unions that will do business with us in certain jurisdictions, but there's substantial fees associated with that, so typically it's a cost analysis exercise.
And what are your security procedures around handling the cash?
So we have a safe room, if you will, and I would prefer to not disclose too much of that in a public forum, but it's all detailed in our security plans. Typically, there's a safe room that's under lock and key. All product and cash will be dropped at the end of the day, and then either picked up by an armored vehicle or taken to a non-disclosed location.
I guess the crux of my question is, you're regularly taking that cash and moving it off the property.
Typically, not day by day, because it would depend on the sales volume, and that can be a tedious exercise, but yeah.
Thanks.
One other question, this is because there was a letter that we received, and in this letter, they talked about armed personnel at the site, and is that typical?
It's not typical, and we don't like to have armored personnel because it can deter and create an uncomfort feeling. We like to have a safe, comfortable environment for people to come shop, ask questions, and we can educate people, not the stereotypical, you got to get patted down, walk through an armored or whatever I'm trying to say. So you guys can require us to do that, but it's not a state requirement per se.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker. Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Doug Zeller. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Harrison's request. First off, I just want to, and he is building a 696 Main Street. Down here, it's old DeVito building adjacent, pretty close to where the police station is. I can't see from the map, but was that in the map? Is that included in the map, Mr. Pierre?
What was that address, Mr. Zeller?
696 Main Street, Mr. Harrison's building.
It's where the cigar shop
Correct.
was briefly, and used to
No.
be DeVito's. It's not included?
It is not included.
I'm surprised. You know why?
It's not included because that was one of the properties that was located south of Main Street within the annotated 250-foot setback. So in other words, if you look at the map there, the green map, that is the one where we adjusted our parameters on defining the 250-foot setback from the school. And
Oh. Is the school
Yeah.
that close? 250 feet?
yeah, the car wash came out, and so did the old DeVito's.
Yeah, and that's part of why I'm here. Is he wanted to make sure that everyone noted that it has been a restaurant, a bar, a cigar shop, never had any problem. Also, the portion that request is of the cannabis sales on the lower portion, and it's set a lot, basically road frontage from where the rest of the building is. The car wash and everything is a lot above it. Then there's, you know, his residence there on top is the large Victorian building, and then down below, which is basically concrete block, and the back end of it is basically rock, stone, small caves. There, for whatever reason, wasn't included, and is correct that it's within the 250, but it's also on road frontage. And as the crow flies, we believe that it's actually meets the requirement of the 250-foot requirement. So that's the reason why I'm here, is to kind of make sure it's noted that it has always been a bar, it's been a restaurant, it's been a commercial development, it's been a cigar shop. We never had any problems with that from the community, and it makes it more of a natural building for this kind of business. Basically, we believe because it's really the only lot that has the large parking lots on both sides of the building, which makes it more visible, and also with the security plan ahead as far as making it, you know, nice looking as far as the historical value, but also the proximity to the police department, we believe would substantially decrease any kind of shadiness, if there is any. I'm not saying there is, getting back to, you know, having preconceived notions, but because of the large openness that the frontage road there on Main Street with parking on both sides, and it being stone and brick, makes it secure, and also, again, the proximity to the police station would make it a natural for this kind of business. And even though it is not necessarily in the map, again, we would like it to be noted that it's probably one of the oldest buildings, bar, who knows what was sold there 100 years ago, and we never had a problem in 100 years. So anyways, and on a personal note, I want to definitely say that Pierre has been very good as far as answering questions, meeting with my clients. A person who's in the business is very interested in going in there, knowing the background of what it takes to run a business like this, the state requirements, and also the local requirements. Is very interested in doing this, not only as preserving the building for what it is, but also making it a safe environment for him to do this kind of business. But Mr. Pierre, he's answered all the questions, even on telephone or when people walk in. So I definitely want to say that Mr. Harrison agrees with what's going on with the map and everything, with the exception of he's not on the map, which from what I'm hearing tonight, they're kind of going on a controlled substance or beer and liquor license. We're really kind of in disbelief that we're not on the map. So if there's any way that we can put a green dot on the lower portion of his building, knowing that nothing would be sold on the upper part where the car wash is, we would want to put that forward and request that from the council and the city planners.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rivas, can you clarify that comment? To look at the map, this map, it looks like that parcel is included in the overlay zone, but maybe I'm not. When I look at this map, it looks like it is, but obviously there's some confusion.
On the map, on the recommended map before you, it is not included. It's not to say that you can certainly forward a recommendation to the city council to consider adding this. As Mr. Zeller pointed out, it's sort of the same predicament that those other parcels follow, is that as the crow flies, it's 250 feet from the edge of the property containing the Sierra School, but for all intents and purposes, it's much greater than 250 feet. And so should the property then be afforded the overlay and somebody comes in and they want to locate a cannabis activity on this particular parcel, they would go through a variance process to have that reduction in the required setback per the business regulations reduced.
Are we getting ourselves in a position where we're maybe going parcel by parcel? I would rather have a global overlay zone without so many exceptions. I don't want to go down a slippery slope.
Sure, I would hope not, but there was particular interest in some of these properties in this particular section of Upper Main, that being the reason why we created those two exhibits. You don't see exhibits created for other areas of the city, because we weren't running into these issues. We had that issue specifically here because that school took out a bunch of parcels where the committee felt, may be appropriate to have a cannabis business, but it ran afoul of the 250 setback requirement.
So it would be a possibility for this commission to recommend adding those parcels to the overall overlay zone.
Yes, either parcel, the one that Mr. Zeller would
This
like to
parcel.
have added,
Okay.
or any of those other ones there that are shown on that green map.
On this, and you're talking about then the map that's on the top row on the far right.
Well, you can see, again, we had the two maps. We had the one that had the green shading around it and the one that had the yellow. You can see the yellow took out a large swath of commercial properties, both on the north and the south side of Main Street. But if you look at the one where we attempted to set the 250-foot radius setback from the actual building and playground area, I believe it actually removed from the green shading area, so it's outside of the 250-foot setback for the property identified as 969 Main Street, the former DeVito's that Mr. Zeller is trying to identify. So in the modified map, it's outside of the 250-foot setback. So you could refer to that map and make a recommendation to the council that, based on this criteria, that we feel that it should be considered, because it would still have to go through that rigorous process. But
Yes.
per this map, you could see that it's outside of the modified boundary of the Sierra School.
In this case, and I don't want to delay the public hearing, but could a variance mechanism also be utilized? So rather than us try to sit here and pick and choose and recommend, could they not make the application and also include with that request for a variance and be considered that way?
Such an application would require a variance. We were just showing that a variance application there's enough, I would say, circumstances here where we can reasonably say that it'd be reasonable to approve such a variance.
Right, clearly, yeah.
To have a slightly different standard. So in other words, again, we're trying to protect, children that go to and from that school, probably that corner lot. It doesn't really have any effect. So they would still have to go through a variance.
And wouldn't we say that perhaps a more, and you can call me and say hold until we bring it back, but wouldn't it be more important to consider the typical walking paths of the students as opposed to strictly a line tape measurement? You follow? I mean, because students aren't walking a lot of this, right? I mean, because of our topography, there are clear ways you walk and ways you don't walk. So I'll just throw that out there.
Thank you.
Return to the chair.
All right. I'd like to return to the public hearing and have our next speaker come up. Anyone? Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Dean Wright. I'm a longtime local resident of the area, and I'm also a property owner, commercial building, and I don't believe that the building is included on the map. The address is, it actually has two addresses. One is 1144 Broadway Court, and the other address is 721 Main Street. And it's actually one building. It's the building that's located on the corner of Broadway Court and Main Street, right next door to the Mosquito Creek Outfitters. It is a very large building. It encompasses a downstairs area that is warehouse right now. It incorporates an upstairs area that has two separate office spaces. And then, excuse me, and then there's an addition to what I'm going to call the side of it, which would actually be the creek side of it. That, honestly, right now, I have a current building permit for remodeling for opening a retail sales office. So I'm not sure why it's not included, or if it is included. We're much farther away than the last speaker, the building he's talking about. I think it would be an ideal location for a dispensary. It has no immediate building next to it. It has freeway access, on-ramps and off-ramps, as well as Main Street. Its historical value is very significant. The building was probably built sometime right before 1860. It's in the 1861 business, Upper Placerville Business Directory. The destination point for tourists is downtown Placerville. And with the way this industry is going, I kind of see it similar to the microbrewery industry in the way that it's evolving and the direction it's going to go, and talk from just being a dispensary to then also being a manufacturer and or growing on site and all these other aspects of the industry. I think this building holds the potential to accommodate any of those as they transpire or evolve.
Could I ask, is this immediately west of the intersection of Broadway and Mosquito Road? Is that right where that is? I'm trying to remember
Yes.
where Broadway Court
Yes,
is.
so if you
Okay.
were
And
coming
Mosquito
down,
Road Outfitters is to the north, on the north side, and then there's another building.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, all right,
yes,
thank you.
if you're driving down Broadway and you come to the four-way intersection, Mosquito Creek would be to your immediate right. My building's to the immediate left. So anyway, I guess my point is, we've already talked about the police department being right across the street. I would love to renovate and restore this building, but the cost factor is immense. But this is one industry that could generate the revenues to do that. And that would be of tremendous value to the city of Placerville to have one of the last older historical buildings brought up to today's standards and to reflect Placerville and or Old Hangtown. So I would hope that you would take into consideration adding that particular parcel to the map. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other speakers?
Hi, thank you. I'm Matt Vaughn. Thank you for having us and listening to all of us. I'm with the Medical Marijuana Caregivers Association of El Dorado County. We've been operating in El Dorado County 15 years coming January. And we've been watching, actually, we originally started here in the city of Placerville. And we're on the original committee for the original dispensaries way back in '05, I believe it was. But then we moved out into the county. Anyway, we've been watching what's going on here in Placerville. It looks great. It's very encouraging that you're moving forward. And I would recommend you keep going with this and consider the properties that have, like DeVito's and so on, and the others on Main Street, that there are properties, individual properties that fit in this, and I think it'd be better to recommend it further rather than going into the variance type of setup for these properties. And a side note on the banking thing, the Rules Committee of the House was chaired by Pete Sessions, where I came from in Texas, my mom's district. He lost his district, and the ranking Democrat will become in charge of the Rules Committee in January in the House, and they're going to move forward with all their cannabis things that have been sitting and not voted on, not allowed to go to the floor to vote on. And he said he's going to get to it as soon as possible, and we're optimistic that the banking, the states' rights, the veterans' rights, all of this will be solved pretty quickly. I think it's bipartisan, and the direction's going that way too. So anyway, thank you, and
Thank you.
all right.
Our next speaker?
Commission members Rod Miller, Earth Groovy Products, El Dorado County Growers Alliance. Would recommend that you move forward with the zoning overlay, and particularly with a view towards expanding the commercial areas where commercial cannabis businesses can function in the city, past Schnell School Road and even downtown Main Street. But primarily what I'm concerned about is to ensure that Cold Springs Road near Placerville Drive is included in the zone, 2850 Cold Springs Road. It's a commercial building that would very much increase its value, would increase the economic activity in the area if it's in the cannabis zone. As you know, you've talked about various dots moving around on the map, so I just wanted to make sure that 2850 Cold Springs Road is in the zone overlay.
Thank you.
Can somebody answer that question? Pierre?
I'll ask staff if, actually, I think I'd like to address that when we close, but because we have several parcels, and this is a kind of general question I'd like to bring back. But do you happen to know that parcel in particular, if that is in the overlay?
No, I don't. I'd have to consult with the map.
Okay.
Okay.
And what was the number again?
2850 Cold Springs Road. It's the Ferguson building. The neighboring buildings are auto body shops, and there's a funeral parlor close by, which are certainly more hazardous activities than a cannabis business. So it's a very commercial area. It's appropriate for having a cannabis business.
I can't really read it on the maps that we have, but 2850 Cold Springs Road.
Correct.
Will allow us to do some research and give you an answer at a later time.
Madam Chair, he stated it was the Ferguson's plumbing supply building. All that property is included.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, the concerns about cannabis businesses attracting crime, I think, are a little bit misplaced. Pure Life, Mr. Chisano's business has been in the county for a number of years, and they've testified to the city that crime associated with cannabis business is no different. The crime levels have been no different than any other business, Starbucks, for example. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else who hasn't had a chance to speak?
Good evening. I'm Brian Sonner. I am particularly interested in the area of Cold Springs Road that he was discussing, but more specifically, there are sections of Cold Springs Road that is in that area there that currently has 3 drug and alcohol rehab houses and a one woman's abuse shelter area there. There are private residences along that section of Cold Springs Road, and it's within 150 feet of some large apartment complexes. In addition to that, it's the normal walking path of an awful lot of children that are coming out of Markham and El Dorado High School, and there is a bus stop on that area of Cold Spring Road for the children that go to the public school system here in Placerville. So I think we might want to take a hard look at that as a small area that may not be appropriate really for a cannabis shop.
Thank you. Any other speakers who have not had a chance? Please step up. Yes.
I didn't know if I took all my 3 minutes, but real quick, real briefly, We just wanted, Mr. Harrison wanted to make it known that we are the only property that has operated as a bar, restaurant, cigar shop, and at this time the bar area down below is vacant, and so he would like to fill that, obviously. And also, he has made substantial improvements to the property, almost $30,000 worth of property, made it a lot better. So he's definitely interested in making it look nice and keeping it preserved to what it is. Also, it's been noted that with technology, that any location with a variance will not fly with the HDL. So if we did happen to get a variance, that would, it definitely would be a kill shot for us, because they wouldn't allow that under the HDL, which is some sort of a state mandate or people that provide license. I'm not even familiar what that is. Maybe you are. But Mr. Harrison would like to formally request approval from the council with the caveat that it be limited to the lower bar area that fronts Main Street. So he just wants to formally request that the rest of the building would not fall under the cannabis sales, but the bar area that has always operated as a commercial business, bar, cigar shop, be considered. And because a variance would disrupt, and it wouldn't make it possible to get the required licensed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rivas, can you shed any light on this? Seems I thought the variance procedure would be allowed, but
I guess my first comment would be we're not getting into that level of fine grain regarding application of the overlay to that property, where we're looking at just a portion of a building or anything of that nature. A lot of that would come about with different plans when they go through the application process, should they reach that point at a future time. As far as the setback, just applying the overlay doesn't then eliminate the 250-foot setback. It still exists, and so there would be still the variance procedure that property owner would have to go through in order to establish cannabis on that property. And then just to add, just based on something another speaker was saying regarding the setback, apartments, there's no setback from apartments, so it wasn't considered a sensitive use. Bus stops, or I think a couple of the other uses that were mentioned. The uses are identified on that map that's behind you. It has the schools, the parks, the daycare centers, those types of uses, churches, but not apartments and not bus stops.
Does the city have discretion in adding or detracting from that list, or is that a state-directed list?
I believe the city does have the discretion to add other uses to those sensitive uses list.
okay, thank you. Any other speakers like to come up to the podium? Going once, twice. Okay, thank you very much, and I appreciate all of you coming out and speaking, giving us your opinions, and taking time. This is a very difficult, not difficult process, but we just want to make sure that we are hearing all sides of the issue. And with that, I'll close the public portion of this the hearing, and bring it back to council for consideration.
Madam Chair, sorry to interrupt, but if staff could just ask for a 5-minute break.
Certainly.
Thank you.
We'll reconvene at, let's see, who's got a watch that's on? 7:55, yes. What did he say?
I said that's a
5-minute break.
He probably gave you a hard time.
Oh, yeah.
I'd like everyone to try to take your seat so we can reconvene the meeting. Gavel, gavel, gavel. All right, I'm going to reconvene our meeting, and we have brought the issue back to the commission for discussion. So, who'd like to? I'll start the discussion by saying that I found that the ordinance is very detailed and had proactively addressed a lot of the concerns that I think valid concerns that people would have with this type of business. It's new for our community, but I think that staff and then working with your consultant, HDL, you've just done a tremendous job putting everything together, like I said, proactively addressing things such as loitering, smells, and then security, and assuring all the oversight from the start of the process, making sure, doing all sorts of checks, and then providing for the city to come in and do their evaluations, and then on an annual basis reviewing all this. So I think that we really have excellent safeguards for the community. And looking over the comments, I think really one of the problems that we have come across is how do we handle individual parcels. We've had people who have asked to be taken off, and then also an equal number, if not more, of individuals requesting to be added to the overlay zone. So those are some of my initial thoughts, and I'd welcome to hear other commissioners' thoughts on this whole process up to this point.
Well, this has been exciting so far. Through this entire hearing, I've heard a lot of tortured rationale. We've heard about the property, for example, east of Schnell School, and that there are criminal considerations there, law enforcement issues. And of course, we've also heard that there are no law or criminal issues that follow cannabis businesses. So I don't know where that rationale came from to exclude that property from the map. It seems like we're operating on different sets of facts here. And the same goes for the Main Street corridor, where we say it is not materially different from an alcohol business. And, there are bars, of course, on Main Street, and some quite rowdy ones, depending on the time that you go. But still, that strip of land is excluded from this as well, and not because it's near a sensitive area like a school, but just because reasons, and I don't know what those reasons are. And there's nothing, I can't square that with logic. And we've heard from a couple of property owners so far asking to have their parcels included because it increases the property value. It's easier for you to find a tenant for that property, or to put some sort of commercial business in that property that's going to make you money, right? And you own commercial property for the purpose of making a profit. And it feels like we're splitting a baby here. And I gotta say, it's either all okay or none of it is, right? And that comes from this idea of us as an arm of government creating wealth artificially by saying these parcels are okay to do this business in, and these ones are not. And it's not like we're talking about where to put like a gas station or a nuclear power plant or something like that. This is a business that was and still is a federal crime. But the laws have recently changed, right, in California. And now by popular vote, these laws have changed, and it's kind of up to us to figure out the implementation of that. And you kind of have to go back to the original rationale behind this change in law in the first place, which is a direct democratic popular vote that falls along a states' rights rationale to make this legal. If that is the case, then it doesn't really make sense for us to be dividing up properties, saying, oh, like this area over here is kind of a high crime area, so we don't want to include that, or this area over here is too nice or characteristic of Placerville, so we don't want to include that. I think it's either all okay or none of it is. So I'm not terribly comfortable with this kind of going back and forth about specific parcels and saying, okay, well, we want to include this one, you know, because this person showed up to the planning commission meeting and cares enough, and we're going to ignore all these others. That just doesn't square with me.
Thank you. Other commissioners, your thoughts?
My thoughts, and I'm a little confused, and as the newest member of the commission, would the public be patient with me? You made a statement that you want visibility, and that's why Placerville Drive and Broadway and those main thoroughfares have been selected. I fail to see what visibility is on Cold Springs Road. So I'm not sure why that's included. Same thing with Perot's. And I've gone down those, I've lived here 43 years, so I've gone down those roads many times. But they're not a frontage per se like Placerville Drive is.
The parcels would front Cold Springs Road or front on Perot's Road.
Right, but neither one of those are what I call main thoroughfares, such as Placerville Drive is.
A main thoroughfare was not a criteria. The committee
Visibility
chose,
from the...
chose the Cold Springs and chose Perot's. They wanted those included, and they wanted to include the parcels that fronted on those roads. And that's why earlier, if you recall, that was something that was probably an oversight by the committee. They clearly, at least they stated to staff that they did not want parcels that were not fronting, and so we've identified some of those, for the most part, along Placerville Drives where they exist, where you have lots that are accessed by a private driveway or an easement through the frontage property. And so those we're recommending, and like I say, we're recommending, you can recommend different, but staff put a red dot on those to recommend that you then agree with staff. This is staff, not the committee. The committee recommended the maps that are shown there with the gray shading.
All right, thank you.
To exclude those. But the committee intentionally put in Cold Springs and Perot's Road, not because they were main thoroughfares, but they felt that they were...
And they're mostly used by locals, not the general public, per se. Thank you for answering my question.
Sure.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Pierre, though, but the issue was more of it was easy to see that the business was there, and not necessarily from a marketing perspective, but that it wasn't hidden away and tucked around where you couldn't see it. Was that part of the rationale of the committee, do you think?
That was part of it. The committee wants the business clearly visible from the roadway, not hidden where you got to drive behind other buildings to get to it.
So a little bit different take. So I'm going to talk just briefly about the ordinance and the text of the ordinance. It was incredibly detailed. The only suggestion that I have for council, frankly, is I would like precision on permit versus license, and I strongly propose license. My approach to this whole issue, I mean, I'm in the manufacture of alcohol, so I make mind-altering substances, and so I'm kind of applying those rules as I go, and I kind of equate it to the hard alcohol licensing and liquor stores, and kind of reference that obliquely in my earlier comments, and that's kind of how I'd approach it. But I'd like to see license used and not permit, make sure there's clarity with that. Beyond that, I have really no suggestions with regards to the text of the ordinance. I think the real issue has to do with the mapping component.
Yeah, Madam Chair, if staff could just give a quick comment. The staff provided that ordinance number 1693, which added it added Title V, Chapter 25. Actually, it added to the business regulation section of the Placerville Municipal Code. That is not before you. That is actually adopted by council. It's already, in fact, I think it was adopted on October the 9th, or let me see, first reading, second reading approved. So I believe it's already the law of the land. But staff wanted you to have that to understand that the rigorous permitting process or licensing process that an applicant will go through. But we're not asking the council, or we're not asking the Planning Commission to provide council with any recommendation on this ordinance. It's already approved.
Okay.
But staff agrees with that issue regarding a license versus permitting, and staff will consult with our city attorney on that if there's an issue or some confusion, because that's an easy fix. But staff did want you to review not only the map, but the actual draft text of the cannabis overlay zone, the text that created that overlay zone. It's very, very simple. There's not a lot to it because it relies on obtaining the license.
Can you point us specifically to that, Pierre? That's not the. That's
that
not
would be
is that the ordinance?
That would be attachment 1.
Yes. Okay.
Is the entire ordinance. It starts with the recitals.
I didn't have any issues.
And then if you turn to page 3, then that's the actual ordinance text that we would add to the zoning code.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. I was good with that. But with regards to the map itself as proposed, and there's just a couple of thoughts with this, and again, equating it to other what I would consider to be like businesses, such as a liquor store. Okay, and nothing wrong with liquor stores, but we don't want them right next to schools, and we don't want them generally where children are going to congregate or be in a school zone. I have some sensitivity to that, and I think we should be protective of that. And so I would be far more interested in the map being sensitive to where children might typically be walking, as opposed to a linear a tape measure. I've always believed that the evil of good is perfect. And I think we heard from a number of folks that are in the profession that they support this, and this is a very good effort. And I would consider it a very good starting point, if nothing else. The one thing that is fundamentally different about cannabis from, say, alcohol and tobacco and firearms, who's bringing the chips, is that those items are legal. Cannabis isn't legal at the federal level. We still have that kind of issue hanging over us. And that may change, probably will. That's great. Okay, but it's still an issue, and so I'm not particularly concerned that we've excluded some parcels, that we've delineated some areas, that historic Main Street doesn't want to have the activity at this point. That's not, in my view, terribly unreasonable. We have a very limited number of sites that we can have, 3. So it's not like, well, it's either open-ended or there can be a whole bunch, therefore we don't have enough parcels. And this is not fixed. This is not static. This can be changed up or down at any time. And so I have a fair amount of comfort starting here. I don't necessarily have an answer for a few of the specific parcels. DeVito's is kind of dear to my heart. When I moved into the neighborhood, I always said that DeVito's was within staggering distance of home. I loved it because I could walk there, and it's been unfortunate that it hasn't really been a great place over the last couple of years, and I hope that something happens, although it's not going to be a drinking place if it becomes a cannabis location. So, long-winded, I excuse me, to staff, are there any issues with non-compatible businesses or locations? For example, I thought the issue about the proximity of the fairgrounds wasn't necessarily an illegitimate comment. That maybe we don't want somebody making their purchase and then going over to the fairgrounds. Not that we can preclude that; they can go anywhere, but just kind of that processing. And are there other non-compatible businesses or areas? Do we care how close these are to hotels, motels, for example? And I'm not necessarily. I'm just raising that for the same reason with schools, and again, a starting point. I'm not so concerned about outside odors and those sorts of things. I think there's plenty of mitigation measures. We see those issues come before commission all the time, and they're mitigated. So I'm less concerned about that. But maybe we should look at the fairgrounds as a sensitive location. That might be something I would ask the council to look at, and then maybe look at hotels, motels for the council just to consider in their final deliberations. Beyond that, I think this is a good place to start, and I have comfort starting here. So,
Are there plans to revisit or reevaluate the overlay zone on a regular basis to identify additional sensitive areas?
I think the council would be interested in hearing your comments on any other areas that maybe we didn't consider that you would consider sensitive that should be considered by the council, such as the fairgrounds, such as hotels and motels.
Okay.
If you
so
feel
that
that's
that could be
appropriate.
part of our recommendation that the city
Yes.
council take on a periodic review of the overlay zone and consider including additional sensitive
Certainly.
areas. Okay.
And I want to add too that should such an establishment begin operating, it has to be renewed annually.
Mm-hmm.
So if there are issues, we don't have to reissue the license.
And I would expect the industry itself, once we get to a point, something is going to happen. We are going to have something, okay, whatever form it is. I anticipate that the industry would, particularly if there's a change federally, that the industry would come to, advocates of the industry would come to city council periodically and say, hey, here's the data, here's our experience rate. I really think that you should consider expanding it, and we would go through that process. So I don't see it necessarily being a static thing at all.
If I may, I think Commissioner Friend makes a good point. As an overlay zone district, it is subject to review amendment. The Planning Commission can make a resolution of intent to amend the zoning code or the map, as can the council. A member of the public can say, well, this property should be included. They can then apply for a rezone of the property. Of course, it go through the whole process. It come before you and then to the council, but that option is still there. This is just a first cut of areas where this cannabis committee felt that they would be more likely to allow the 3 dispensaries or 3 labs to locate.
If this ever does become legal at the federal level, this business evaporates from local retail. Cannabis is lightweight, travels well, and some jurisdiction is going to want the tax. So as soon as Amazon sells cannabis, these stores disappear. And I've seen this happen to other industries as well. So given that right now we are in this legal gray area, again, it comes back to we are essentially choosing property owners to make them more wealthy before something happens at the federal level, at which point it all kind of resets to zero. I don't know if I'm comfortable with that kind of splitting of the baby. Because it's, you know, somebody goes into the cannabis business, and you know, we've heard from folks in the audience here who operate cannabis businesses, and yes, I'm sure that's not easy, as any business comes with challenges, but simply owning property that we are now saying you're allowed to have these kind of businesses in. This is presumably high margin, or else I don't imagine y'all would be in it, and there's demand for it that is never going to go away. So simply owning a property upon which one of these businesses is allowed makes that property owner wealthier. And we're saying that some property owners, by virtue of having a parcel in an area that is, I don't know, far enough from a school and in one of the areas that the city council thought was okay to have this sort of business in, that their property is now worth more, whereas others, which again are not near any of these sensitive areas like schools or what have you, I'm speaking specifically about east of Schnell, that they're excluded from this. And again, it comes back to either it all being okay or none of it okay.
So, if I may, Madam Chair, but along those lines, we already do that with just use the liquor store. You cannot have a liquor store anywhere you want, right? So we already do that. Maybe not to the degree that's being proposed here, but not all parcels are created equal. I failed to mention the East Broadway area, and also in sensitive areas. Somebody mentioned rehab centers, and there is something that just bothers me for whatever reason. I don't know that I want to have this particular type of business any more than I'd want to have a microbrewery or a liquor store, you know, next to a center for troubled children or a rehab center. There's just some things. It's like that doesn't seem the best use, and so I don't believe that these types of compromises are inappropriate or unfair.
Certainly agree that compromises surrounding sensitive neighbors like schools or rehab centers, I think that's a separate issue. What I'm concerned about with is the folks who own the property, and when they bought the property as a commercial investment, as you would buy a commercial property, you're not going to live there, you plan to make money from it. I don't think it was reasonable to assume when you bought that property that, you know, there was going to further on down the line be this legal gray area where the voters of California now decided marijuana is legal, but still illegal at the federal level, so that's a business that may or may not be in your building. Whereas if you buy a parcel and maybe somebody wants to open a liquor store, you're aware of all of those restrictions around the parcel when you buy it. I mean, there's a reasonable assumption of what types of businesses could possibly move into a commercial building. And I think years ago, if you bought a commercial property with the intent of saying, okay, well, you know, cannabis is going to be legal in a couple of years, so I'm just going to hold on to this, and this is going to be the perfect spot to rent to a cannabis business, I don't think anybody thought that. I mean, anybody in their right mind thought that. Which is why now we're kind of faced with this uncomfortable task of picking and choosing which commercial property owners kind of get this benefit of this really screwy legal situation, and which ones don't.
Barbara, I think you had a comment. I wanted to get back to you.
Clarification. So we have 3 facilities allowed legally in the city of Placerville. So you have 6 applicants. How do you winnow it down? Who's the party that does that?
Well, my understanding, the way the process will work is the city will open the application process, and then it will close the application process. So that'll probably occur sometime in between February and April. There will be an opening and a closing, and so individuals who desire to have a dispensary operation, the city will submit their application. They'll go through that rigorous application process that I briefly sort of described to you, that's still not in its final stages. And then it goes through the whole process, including a public hearing. So we'll notify property owners within 600 feet of whatever the proposed location is, and then we'll hear more from the public, and then it all comes down to the city manager actually then making the final approval after it's gone through the selection committee and that scrutinize the applications and such. And so if we receive 6 applications or 20 applications, the top 3, the 3 highest score getters, will be issued the license.
Okay. I have a second concern, not just the fairgrounds, but the museum, which is continually toured by local school students, particularly elementary students, and of course the Veterans building behind it. So I have some issues with something in that precise location because of those 3 entities. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'd just like to get back to, I'd like to craft a resolution that addresses a recommendation that addresses everyone's concerns. And so I want to make sure that I understand your concerns. Would you be comfortable in recommending that the city council open up the cannabis business overlay zone to all parcels that are already zoned commercial, highway commercial, I think industrial? That was kind of the basis, and then we layered on the sensitive things like schools and different centers. Would you be more comfortable recommending that to the city council so that we're not in the position of picking winners and losers, or are you just not comfortable? I guess I'm not clear what it is you're advocating. I think that, we had a committee that came together and they recognized certain restrictions or limitations. So what would you propose as a way to work around your concern?
I'm not comfortable with the picking of winners and losers here.
And so you would propose that the cannabis business overlay zone look more like, what would be included that's not included now?
It's one of these things where you've got to ask, is it possible that doing nothing is the right answer? That you say that there does not need to be a cannabis overlay zone, that ought not be a thing. You follow? You understand what I'm saying?
If staff could assist.
Go ahead.
I think what the commissioner is suggesting is that, and he has a point, the city could have been less restrictive on defining exactly where these 3 cannabis and or 3 manufacturing or labs would go, and it could have just said that we will allow all properties that are zoned commercial or highway commercial in the city, excepting those that are within 250 feet of identified and defined sensitive use, could then be an appropriate site for cannabis and not have the overlay. It could have been just, they have to meet the setback. But the council, or at least the council, wanted to have it a little bit more defined where they're going to go. And I guess with that, I want to differentiate between what is a general plan and zoning changes are legislative acts, broad discretion with the city council to do that. You don't even really need to make any findings. Broad discretion. I mean, the zoning, of course, is implementing the general plan, has to be consistent. But it is still a legislative act as opposed to quasi-adjudicatory. And just so everybody understand what that means is, just say, for example, the direction was that we're going to allow a dispensary in all commercial zones and highway commercial zones with a conditional use permit. So now when that applicant applies for a conditional use permit, that's quasi-adjudicatory, means a clear deliberation has to take place considering all the facts such that findings are made to approve or to disapprove the application, where typically on general plan or rezones, that's not necessary. I think the only necessary finding that would need to be made on a rezone is that it's consistent with the general plan, but since it's an overlay adding a commercial zone, then it's okay. And just to give some anecdotal, when I was working with El Dorado County, I was the general plan project manager from 1993 to 1996. And those of you who live in the county know that the general plan took 20 years plus to finally get adopted, and millions of dollars in legal fees. So the reason why I bring that up is because it's a common statement, and that planners all know, and that when you do a general plan amendment or you do rezones, you create windfalls and you go oxes. That's the nature of the beast of land use decision making. It's not something that's parceled out freely. Some people are zoned commercial, some people are zoned residential, some people are zoned industrial, some people get multifamily, and some of those create a lot of value from property, and those that don't get what they want, of course, then they don't get what they want. And typically cities will downzone property. So when it does a general plan amendment, it may say, we don't want commercial over here, we want it over there now. And so it may downzone property. And so it's actually goring somebody's ox. But that's perfectly within the realm of the police powers and the legislative ability of a municipality. And I just put that out there just so you understand that you can, or the city can, define these areas. Not that what Commissioner Zuba is saying is another approach, an appropriate approach, and just say all commercial or all highway commercial zonings shall have it, excepting being within a 250-foot setback. You can make that recommendation that the council consider that.
Presumably the DEA could come in and gore quite a few oxes here. Is that accurate? That's sort of administration dependent. The point is that we're not talking about where to put a gas station, right? This is a new beast because it is a product of direct democracy. It is a state law that is in direct conflict with a federal law, and that's kind of new, right? It's not like we're deciding where to put a mall, which is something that is very well known to people and something that is generally legal. We're deciding where we're going to put something that is like half illegal. And to me, yes, scoring oxes, making windfalls, but because we're in this gray area, it's unclear how this becomes a fair process to the people who own property. They're still accepting a risk in entering into this kind of business. I mean, anybody who's ever run afoul of the Office of Foreign Asset Control understands that when the government wants to come in and show you what they've got, there's really nothing that's going to stop them from doing this. So for us to say we're going to disadvantage a certain portion of property by not allowing this sort of business there, I mean, how many barriers can you put in front of a business that wants to operate? That's what I'm less comfortable with.
Madam Chairman, I'm going to float a motion, if for no other reason than perhaps it can get us to
All right.
a recommendation. And before I do that, do we need a motion? We don't need to make a motion on the ordinance because, as you said, that's already been adopted. This is just for our own edification, so I don't have to worry about that.
Yes, staff is requesting that you make a motion on attachment 1, which is the draft ordinance
right.
text creating, it's a text that creates the cannabis
Yes,
overlay
correct.
zone, and then the maps, and staff would recommend that you consider the annotated, the shaded maps
Right.
that are behind you that have been annotated by staff, essentially the red dots that are deleting parcels and then the one green dot adding one.
Okay.
Or you can just leave it
For the
alone.
record, attachment 2 has already been adopted by the
Yes,
city
correct.
council.
Okay, thank you. So my motion is going to be specific to the annotated maps. And so I move that we recommend to council that the annotated maps as presented to us this evening be adopted as the cannabis overlay with the following modifications. That Placerville Drive from Ray Lawyer Drive to Highway 50 be excluded. So essentially starting at Rayleigh's and moving all the way, including the fairgrounds and the auto dealership and that area to Highway 50, that would be excluded. Okay, so we're clear on that. Businesses fronting on Main Street and Placerville Drive that may have had similar uses, which I'm defining vice uses such as alcohol, be included in the overlay. And that council give consideration for the proximity of hotels and rehab centers as also to be considered, and the walking and the typical walking walking routes of school children be also considered sensitive locations for finalization of the map. That would be my motion.
All right, we have a motion in front of us. Do we have a second for that motion?
Second.
And we have a motion and a second. I'd like to open this up for discussion. Mr. Zuba?
I'm sorry, I had one other item I want.
Oh.
One other item, and if you'll accept a friendly amendment, I would also, as part of my motion, like to permit Member Zuba to write a dissenting or an opinion recommendation to council with some of the concerns that he has. Because I do respect the positions that he's got, and I don't want them to get simply lost because a motion gets voted up or down. And so I would suggest that we as a body agree that what he's saying has merit to the point he should be able to write that to council, if you'll accept that as a friendly amendment. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to open this for discussion, and I am not in favor of those amendments, given what we've heard before about picking winners and losers, and without any real, we don't have any evidence that that there's a negative impact from the possibility of having a cannabis dispensary or business from Ray Lawyer to Highway 50. I feel that that's overly, that's excluding too many parcels from the possibility of opening up one of these businesses. So you said businesses that, you specified businesses on Main Street that formerly were vice-related. Again, I think we're getting almost into spot zoning, which we really should avoid whenever possible. I would rather see a wider, more inclusive zone that, should a problem arise, then I think we have plenty of safeguards in the ordinance that it would no longer be included. And so that's why I'm not in favor of those particular amendments to adopting the overlay zone as displayed behind us.
Well, let's take the third one then that you didn't mention, and that is a consideration of hotels, rehab centers as possible sensitive sites. You didn't mention that one. So do you have comfort with that?
I think we had a committee that came together and identified and took input, gave their experience on what they felt were sensitive sites, and I think that level of review has already taken place and resulted in the overlay zone that we have before us tonight. So at this point, until we see a problem or a conflict, I'm not. I'm reluctant to include those.
Except that process, if I understand correctly, that process wasn't a public process?
Yeah, Madam Chair, for clarification, those sensitive uses are described under state law. So the city was required to consider the sensitive uses as shown on that map, and that being schools, city parks, daycare centers, churches, and anything else happens to be listed on there. So to add hotels or to add walking corridors that maybe are frequented by children, those would be additional sensitive uses that the city has the ability to consider, but it wasn't required under state regulations.
Thank you.
And my motion isn't requiring them, it's just asking the city the council to consider them when they finalize. So it's just a matter of elevating that to their attention. So, and I do think that the fairgrounds and the museum do kind of fall into the broader category of public parks and use. So I don't know that that's incompatible. So then let's look at the Placerville Drive, the Ray Lawyer to Highway 50. So on the south and east portion of that route, you have the Rayleigh Shopping Center, right? And then you have pretty much the fairgrounds, and then you might possibly have the area where the donut shop is, for example, and
Affordable
Dickie's
furniture.
Barbecue.
Yeah, the old Safeway.
Yeah, I don't know that so that area. But I'm talking about strictly those that front the Placerville Drive. Then across the street, you have Placerville Brewing Company, and you have several other shops. So perhaps that requirement could be modified if you're comfortable calling out specifically the fairgrounds and the museum, because I don't think that would be an inappropriate area to exclude, and then leave. I guess you couldn't have one in there anyway because there's no businesses there. But that general area, I think some consideration is not inappropriate. That location. And then finally, with regards to the frontage on the business on Main Street with similar uses, I don't necessarily have an issue. There might be a better way to fix that, because I do think I don't understand why, for example, the DeVito's location, and I'm reluctant to pick out any particular business in this case, but it doesn't. I guess it has to do strictly with the tape measure from the school, but it just doesn't seem right. That doesn't make any sense to me aside from that particular piece. And I don't have a better way necessarily to fix it, and that's why I kind of went to similar previous uses, because it was okay at some point to have those businesses, so this really isn't much different. So maybe if there's a way to get to that point. Of course, I don't know if I'll get Commissioner Zuba one way or the other, so I have to spend my effort with you.
No.
And again, it's a recommendation. I think we also have to keep in context. It is a recommendation, just some things for council to consider when they do this. I still think it's a very, very good first start.
Well, I agree. It is an excellent first cut at this overlay, and I think that actually what I don't know if you can amend your motion further, but we had discussed earlier, where's this in my notes, that the council consider scheduling a periodic review of this to possibly incorporate additional sensitive areas. And I would be much more comfortable with that since we've gone to, there's been a lot of work so far to accept the overlay as actually as amended with those red dots and this green dot with the recommendation that they revisit this, establish a schedule to revisit this, and possibly take public comment to consider all sorts of sensitive sites. I mean, tonight you've just identified hotels, rehab centers, and walking routes, but I don't know that those are valid concerns, and I think maybe I don't want to restrict things further. I like your comment about previously vice-related businesses. I think that gives us, that's a very good reason that one building in particular falls into that category. But there could be other ones that we just haven't been brought to our attention right now. So
I
would
support
you consider
the periodic review without question. I don't know if this is the correct vehicle because we're being asked to approve the map.
We're sending a recommendation, so
would it go in the map recommendation? This is to staff, I guess, or can it go in the ordinance? Where is my document?
Well, staff is asking for, or the council is asking that you review the draft zoning code text and then the map.
Right.
It's not anything related to modification of the
okay. Well, right. But couldn't
business
wouldn't it be
regulations.
possible to add into attachment 1 that the effect? There's section 7 is an effective date. Okay. Is there any reason why we could not add in there, somewhere in there, that it shall be reviewed every 2 years or annually or something along those lines? Is that inappropriate? It's a recommendation. They don't have to take it.
You could certainly recommend that, but I certainly want to point out again, I go to the involved application process. Just because a piece of property has the cannabis overlay, it doesn't necessarily mean that somebody will be able to establish a business on that piece of property because of the scoring, the ranking system that's been incorporated into the application process, which involves the submittal of a neighborhood compatibility plan. So there's a point system that'll be applied to that. So I think there's enough evaluation at that level to where if a piece of property is not let's just say it scores lower, then it's going to fall out.
But I think the chair is actually suggesting a broader review of the overlay, even getting to the point of, do we even need the overlay anymore? We started with this because this is new to us, but maybe we realize, hey, we don't need a cannabis overlay anymore. So we're going to take it out, and then we're just going to rely upon the fairly detailed application process to do our screening for us. I mean,
I guess my only comment on that would be the staff is happy to forward that recommendation to the council, but typically that's something you don't see in a zoning code.
Sure.
Typically it manifests itself as a necessity for the city to reevaluate it. So it could be, I don't know what the future holds for cannabis. I mean, is Placerville going to be the new Mecca? We're going to be drawing people off of Highway 50 before they go up to Tahoe, to where there's this huge demand, and revenue is coming in, and the council decides, or the planning commission for that matter decides, we need to expand this. It's not to say that the city can't consider that. But I'm not sure if you're looking at something where there's a sunset where by this date, we're going to revisit it and hold a hearing on revisiting the overlay zone. You can certainly recommend that, but I'm thinking that's what you're trying to get at.
You know, I'm really trying to get at addressing the chair's point about establishing a periodic review and what's the best way to recommend that to the council. Because this is a recommendation, we're not being prescribing specifically what we're doing. It's a little bit more flexible. So I'm comfortable with it if it's in the record going, you know, the report that goes to the council when they see this. You know, the Planning Commission recommended periodic review. The Planning Commission recommend the council be clear or consider some other areas of sensitive site, like walking corridors for children, for example. Those are simply recommendations for them to incorporate in their deliberation. That's how I view it. We're not specifying it. The specificity does come down to specifically excluding the fairgrounds, for example. I think that area, and do we want to do anything, or do we simply want to raise the issue? The council should look at the area of Placerville Drive in this vicinity because the fact that the fairgrounds and the museum are there. We could do it, again, simply a recommendation to council.
Yeah, staff can certainly do that.
See, so
forward those
so
to
that way,
council.
I mean, the council knows, hey, we're bringing this to your attention. You know, we would like you to consider it and then make a determination. So if we do it that way.
Clarification. As I perceive it, we have two issues. We can reject the whole thing, the overlay, and open up the cannabis business to anywhere in the city of Placerville that meets the commercial and the zoning and the application process. Or we can accept the motion as presented with the modifications. Is that correct?
Yes, you can certainly forward a recommendation to the council, essentially recommending that the council approve the zoning text amendment, adding in the overlay, and then approving the map, either as modified or not modified by staff, but as shown in your staff report. And then staff can certainly bring these other items for consideration by the council when they deliberate on the item.
But we can reject the
Or
overlay
you can
per se.
reject altogether and say you recommend that the city council pursue a different approach than having an overlay, that it just consider allowing cannabis activities in any commercial or highway commercial zone, excepting the 250-foot setback, of course.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so the motion, oh, I'm sorry.
Well, I would simply say if I need to modify my motion, instead of specifically calling these out, I would modify my motion that we recommend to council that they look at this particular area, the Placerville Drive area, that in the vicinity of the fairgrounds and the museum, to look at that and the surrounding parcels as possible sensitive, just to consider it. To consider hotels, rehab centers, walking quarters for children as potential sensitive sites, just to consider it, bring it to their attention. And then to consider any business, I won't even call it on a main street, but parcels having businesses that have or have had businesses that would be in considered the vice professions, and I think that's typically, right now is limited to alcohol. When we get into brothels, it'll be a completely different discussion. That's 2 years from now. But so now, not calling them out specifically, just saying, asking the council, just bring them to their attention. Just we recommend that you consider these. So that I would make that amendment if I can get an acceptance from the seconder of the motion.
Well, I have no objection to bringing anything to the city council's attention.
I'll take that as a yes. And then what you want to do with the motion, Madam Chair?
Okay, so we,
And my recommendation for Commissioner Zub is still in there too.
okay.
Point of order.
Let's call this for a vote.
Point of order.
Yes.
The The statements just made by Chair Friend, we didn't capture that necessarily as an amendment. Your words amendment came later, and so I didn't capture everything.
So I'm sorry, I was amending my motion. My original motion called out Placerville Drive from Ray Lawyer to Highway 50 specifically, right?
Yes.
So I said specifically exclude that. So I'm amending that to say, bring this area to the council's attention to consider in light of the existence of the fairground and the museum, that maybe the parcels in the immediate vicinity, maybe those should be considered, that should be considered a sensitive area and excluded. Consider it. Consider any businesses that have or have had a business in the vice professions as eligible, okay, and then give consideration to the proximity of hotels, rehabilitation centers, walking quarters for children, etc., as possible sensitive areas. Just consider these in your final map. That was my amendment.
Staff has one more comment.
Yes.
An earlier statement by Chair Friend regarding the bringing back of this ordinance for future consideration to perhaps reduce the area of the zone or expand. This, under existing city code, this body, the Planning Commission, has administrative authority over the zoning ordinance and the zoning map. So you as a body could come forward with a resolution of intent, is what it's called. And what that would do is it would alleviate or bring forward the intent of this body to request that city council look at expanding the boundaries as you've identified. So that is open to you currently and going forward.
Thank you very much. I think that alleviates my concern. I find that your motion is too restrictive and too particular. I think I would be much more comfortable just at this point recommending that the council adopt the overlay as displayed tonight with the amended red dots and so on, and let this
and you wouldn't
play out.
You wouldn't bring any areas to their attention then at
Not at this point. I think I would rather see this process play out, give them our recommendation, recognize the input and the consideration that's gone into this up to this point, and not monkey with it. I mean, we're getting down, again, like, I won't say spot zoning, but it's akin to that. And I really take it to heart what you're talking about, picking winners and losers. I think they've all, sensitive areas have been taken into consideration. That one area that is east of us, I think that was taken off the list because of more broad security concerns. So knowing that we can, as a body, revisit this and perhaps make a different recommendation in the future might be a better way for us to go, rather than saying this, this business, this area, not that area. I don't see that as not as workable. I'm not as comfortable with doing that.
Well, I don't think there's any deficiency in looking at the community and saying not every parcel is equal, not every location is equal, and so what is our level of review? What is our level of analysis? I mean, we can simply say, yeah, we really don't have a feeling about this one way or the other. It looks good. Let's just start there. But I think there are some areas that are different, and the fact that we're not making a change to East Broadway, I think, supports that position. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, we'd say we should throw East Broadway in there as well.
Okay. Any other comments? Well, I think we should have a vote on the motion before us, which, does anyone want that read again? Mr. Painter, I think you've gotten all the detail.
I might have difficulty with trying to come up with the exact language, but
Okay. Does anyone want to hear it again? Or are you comfortable with our discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I am, but
Okay.
I wouldn't want to deprive
Ms. Raines?
anyone else of.
Are you comfortable with, we've talked around, we've made a few changes. Are you still comfortable with your understanding of the motion?
Well, yes and no.
I can certainly read it. I think,
Can I- can-
I think
can I read-
staff would like to
Then
make
just
sure we
please-
have it correct.
Yeah, please read it again, Mr. Painter, just so we know what's before us.
Or Mr. Rivas.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, basically, let's see, the motion was to recommend that the council approve the annotated maps and the ordinance as presented, including the following to be given to the council, and that's Placerville Drive from Ray Lawyer Drive to Highway 50 be excluded, being in an area that may be considered sensitive due to fairgrounds and the museum. And then 2, businesses fronting Main Street and Placerville Drive that had a former vice type of use be considered. And then 3, the council considers the proximity to hotels, and I'm assuming we mean hotels and motels, and rehab centers, and walking routes of school children be considered as sensitive locations. And then the 4th one was that the commission would allow Commissioner Zuba to provide a dissenting opinion to the council.
Just with regards to the first one, on the Placerville Drive, Ray Lawyer component, we're not recommending that be excluded.
Right, that the council consider it.
Just the council give consideration to that area as a possible sensitive area.
Okay.
Yeah, just so we're clear on that. And then with regards to the frontage, it wasn't limited to Main Street in any frontage parcels.
Okay, I had Main Street and Placerville Drive, so it's more than that.
It was, yeah, I mean, I know there was one business that came up, but I wanted to get away from identifying just the one business, so it was more of a general statement, okay? If a business had been a bar, for example, right, or a liquor store, for example, is or previously, okay, then in my view, that means it was okay for that type of business, and so this new overlay shouldn't preclude. That's really what I'm getting at with that, and so they should look at that. So, and broadly spoken, not specific to Main Street or anywhere else. Okay. So much more broadly spoken.
Okay.
Please call the vote.
Member Juba,
No.
Chair Keeney,
No.
Member Raines,
Yes.
Member Friend.
Yes.
So
Mr.
we-
Zuba, your prediction of earlier this evening has come to pass.
I would like to put another motion out before the body for your consideration so that we can at least leave on a positive note. And I would like to move that we recommend to the City Council the business overlay zone as presented tonight, amended by staff, and that recommend that the City Council approve the ordinance, the ordinance for the overlay zone as shown, and just leave it at that. Can I get a second for that motion?
I'm a team player.
I'll take that as a yes.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right.
I
please-
mean,
Oh, go ahead.
Reiterating what I said earlier, that the evil of good is perfect, and I believe that. I am uncomfortable sending forth a recommendation that doesn't show that we had any deliberation, or there in fact may be some things that need to be considered. And so we're really not providing any guidance whatsoever to council. So, I have a lack of comfort with that. But I'm a team player too, but that's not gonna, that won't reflect at the end of the day. So that's all.
Any further discussion? Oh, yes, Ms. Riggs.
Well, my concern is that it sounds like we're getting into micromanaging the city. And I just think that there's just too much nickels and dimes going on around here, okay? That if we approve the overlay as presented, and then the city council or the applicant's process is followed line by line with the criteria, then I'm more comfortable with that. I don't want to micromanage. If I had my way, to be honest, I would like to have it extended east of Snell School Road. And I live over there, so I'm not making any profit off it. I'll probably use, my property values will probably go in the toilet. But I just don't want to handicap the city staff by micromanaging what they can or cannot do. And I think that every issue that we're concerned with can be handled case by case by case on the applicants. Thank you.
I agree. Thank you very much. Further comment? Can we have the vote?
Chair Keeney.
Aye.
Member Raines.
Aye.
Member Friend. Excuse me, Chair Friend.
Boy.
Member Juba.
I will, yeah, go ahead.
No.
You just made
Member Friend.
my job easier. Aye.
So the motion passed 3-1. Thank you very much, and I also want to thank all the members of the audience for sticking with us so long. This is, very important, and so we move forward. So that closes this issue on our agenda. If I can find my copy of the agenda, let's move forward to what we have. Matters from commissioners and staff.
If I may, Madam Chair, I have one issue, and I've been gone for a couple of weeks, as this body knows, and 2 days after I left, the state exploded, frankly. I've been on 12-hour shifts since my return from New Zealand in support of these operations, but one of the things that struck me while I was gone and watching all of this happening is that what happened in Paradise could very easily happen here in Placerville. Now, I don't know, I'm sure there have been some discussions on this, but I don't know what those are, and I have not had the opportunity because of my obligations since I've returned to delve into it. However, I think we need to be, the city, the community, the county, we need to be very aggressive at looking how we can mitigate the danger that I've talked about this before in this body with the tree mortality and the fuel loads that we have. We've got to do something. So I don't know what the city is doing, if they've set up any kind of a committee. I don't know what the county is doing, but I plan to write a letter to the mayors as well as to the chair of the Board of Supervisors that we have to do something. And we can't allow people to be camping anywhere and everywhere they want. I mean, I have sympathy for the homeless, but some of the fires last year, like down by the Getty Museum, were caused by campfires, illegal campfires, homeless people camping. So we can't afford that, and so I'm very, very serious about this. I'm very, very concerned about our community and the risks that we have. So I'll get off my soapbox.
Oh, thank you very much. That's a very important topic, and I don't know. I know people have spoken in front of the city council, but not sure what the plans are as far as fire safety.
Staff can add just a few comments on that. You may not be aware that we have hired a part-time code enforcement officer in the Development Services Department, and so it's the whole gamut from sign violations to permitting or building violations, but we also place a high priority on fire danger, and so in particular dead and dying trees. So we do notify the property owner, and we are requiring them to remove the trees. We work closely with El Dorado County Fire so that they're CC'd on all of our notices, so that they also can go out and cite the property owner if there's fuel load or dead or dying brush and grass on their property that constitutes a fire hazard. El Dorado County Fire now does have citation ability and fines that they've instituted by adoption of ordinances to be able to do that. Staff did have a meeting today with El Dorado County Fire, and in regards to making an application with CAL FIRE, there are monies available where we're looking at maybe partnering with El Dorado County Fire and hiring somebody that would actually be more proactive to cause property owners to bring their properties into providing for a better defensible space, especially in the urban wildlands interface zones, which of course the city of Placerville is surrounded by that. And so we are doing that. And so yes, the city is well aware of the fire danger, and it could happen to us, and we're trying to be proactive in addressing the fire hazard and fuel load issues that we have here.
I would ask the city and the county, I would encourage them to pursue whatever grant monies might be available to help offset the cost, both for homeowners as well as all land. I mean, I think we need to be very, very aggressive on this.
And also, you mentioned the homeless, camps, and we do recognize that is an issue. You may or may not be aware that there's been a number of fires in the city. They were fortunately put out before they got out of hand, but we had some illegal camps on that 100-plus acre property by Eschaton. Those fires were put out by El Dorado County Fire. We also had one on the Oding property that's bounded by Railroad Drive and Placerville Drive up there on the side of the hill. And staff has been working closely with the property owners and, basically making them be more responsible with the maintenance and upkeep of their property, so that it is their responsibility to make sure that the property is free of debris and does not become a homeless camp, especially in the case of properties that are owned by absentee owners. They need to understand that they do have a responsibility of maintaining those properties in a safe manner so it's not a threat to public safety. And that includes making sure that the properties are free of homeless camps and potential fires and debris that causes a public health threat.
They came to my property, they gave me a clearance, I had them sign it, and then I put it in my safe deposit box, so if any question ever arose, I can show that I met the criteria. So any homeowner can do that if they're concerned about their property and fire.
It seems like there might be steps that we can take under our charge as the Planning Commission to help with this. And we've talked about recommending species of trees, for example, and we deal with offsets and things like this. This is all fire related. Perhaps this is something that we should look at more closely in a future meeting.
In future construction, in future.
Yes.
Okay. Sure.
I don't know what that looks like in practice, but certainly something that we do have authority over.
Are there any other matters from staff?
Yeah, due to the lateness of the hour, I'll try to keep this brief. Just to announce that recent actions by the City Council regarding items that came before you, that recommendations brought forward, one of which was a map amendment for the Quartz Mountain subdivision for a parcel to expand the building envelope. That was approved by City Council at their first meeting in November. Just a week ago, the council approved the conditional use permit and site plan review for the Neiman's Auto Touch project, and also adopted the resolution that amended the general plan land use element, removing the exclusion of auto sales and service uses from the commercial zone. Also, from a matter of upcoming agendas, we will not have an agenda on the 18th. Also, your first meeting next year falls on the 1st, which of course is a holiday, and so there will be no meeting on January 1. We do anticipate having items on January 15th. Public hearing, variance request for a setback variance. Also, an update, I think Chair Friend may remember this project. The Marshall Hospital has some temporary commercial coaches, and one of the conditions requires them to come back before you every 2 years with a needs assessment. So that'll be on the docket for the 15th. One last question is more of a housekeeping item. Due to the changes that I just described that the council made regarding the land use element in that text amendment, it is a loss by Lynn and myself as to the way that document was provided to you for your reference. What I mean by that, are your copies of the land use element single-sided or double-sided? Because that will reflect how we get that amendment back to you. You might want to think about that. Send me an email or to Lynn, and we'll get at the next meeting. We'll get the revisions to you. But we could not remember whether it was a single-sided or double-sided.
Okay.
Or you could just put them, are they on the web? We can just go and get what we need. Are they there?
Yeah, we'll make sure that gets up there, yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's all I have.
Thank you very much. No other matters. I move that we adjourn. Thank you, everyone.
Well run.